Folks, we're going to be starting in about 2 minutes. Could you please take a seat? We got plenty of chairs up front here. Grab that next cup of coffee or that muffin and please have a seat. Folks, if you could have a seat, we have a few chairs. We have a few chairs up front here.
Effort that is just starting to unfold, and it's a very exciting time to be a CIO. Not just about technology. It's really about focusing on what the right business drivers are to change the way that we deliver services.
We really want to move to a true risk management posture for cybersecurity and really understand the cybersecurity capabilities we have at our disposal.
Culture of innovation is critical, particularly in the 21st century. Technology enables mission.
We're not where we were 20 years ago with partnering with industry. Today, I think it's much more like a partnership. It has to be.
So if you want to be a change agent and you want to be a successful change agent, you've got to discover what your passion is, and you've got to really understand people and how to work with people.
And so it's vital that we work together with industry to understand our needs. We need to know what the latest and greatest is out there, and then figure out a systemic way that we can actually remix things in almost a modular fashion. You really want to actually galvanize and motivate other people to be a part of your movement. And the only way that's possible is if you take the time to listen and understand them.
People are really interested in how to make the government more innovative. We're super excited about having the leaders from these agencies who are doing these innovative things to come and talk to a wider audience, and we are very excited to host it.
Good morning, everybody. All right, wow, there's some energy already. You know, this event is about innovation, and as I've been talking to several people, innovation is not a luxury item. It is mandatory, not only for government, but certainly even for any large organization. The pace of technology is so rapid that everybody has to innovate to keep pace. My name is Steve Vito. I am the president of GovernmentCIO Media. And on behalf of my colleagues that put in many, many hours in pulling this event off today, I want to thank you all for being here. It means a lot to us. This is an important topic, so thank you for being here. At GovernmentCIO Media, I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with us. We're relatively new. We are very typical media in that we do have a website. We have 2 newsletters. By the way, about to introduce a 3rd newsletter on artificial intelligence, going to be called Eye on AI, which I thought was a clever name, thanks to Camille Tootie, who came up with that one. So we'll have 3 newsletters, and of course we do events. And this is the third event that we're putting on. We're going to be doing 2 more events I just want to bring to your attention. One is May 17th. That will be in this building, and we will, you know, have the shades ready for you at the very beginning. And let's see, that is going to be here, and that's on health IT. And then in July 19th, the details yet to be worked out. That one will be more focused on national security. So you could always go to our website, GovernmentCIO Media, and we'll have all the details for those events. You know, again, the topic of the day is innovation. You're going to hear government panelists talking about it. And the fact is that nobody can innovate on their own. They have to partner with private industry. There's just no way around it. And I think if you talk to the government people, they will admit to that too. It has to be a partnership, private sector and public sector. And we have 5 companies from the private sector that have stepped up to support this event. We've met with them, and they said, we're on board. We believe in innovation, and we want to bring innovation into government. Those companies are Pure Storage, Nvidia, Red Hat, Datrium, and Rubrik. Please join me in giving them a sincere appreciation. There is just no way that we could put on an event like this without sponsors, and certainly not in a venue like this. So thank you very, very much. And, you know, the whole point of this doing something together is that you have an opportunity to mingle. So if you're not sure, you know, what those companies do, there's plenty of, you know, they have representatives here. Ask them, and that's the whole point. By the way, I also should say that we are live streaming, so obviously the folks that are watching us online won't have a chance to mingle. But we are live streaming this. It's on Facebook Live, it's on YouTube, and it's on our own website. And so we're very, very excited about that as well. By the way, this morning's program is only half of the total program. The other half is tonight, and that's at 5 o'clock. And we have a reception, but it's going to be very different. It's not just going to be, there won't be chairs, so there'll be plenty of room to mingle. It's at 5 o'clock, and what we're going to be doing is more of a structured networking. Many of the government folks that you're going to hear from today have agreed to come back and be available on a one-on-one basis just to tell their story on what they're doing that's innovative within government. So if you can, we would love to have you come back this afternoon, and if you need some incentive, there will be an open bar, and there will be some food. Okay, enough from me. Let me introduce our first speaker, our first panel. I've had the pleasure of working with Camille Tutti. I'm sure many of you know Camille. She is a journalist that is renowned in this market, working on some terrific websites and publications. She's the editor-in-chief of what we're doing at GovernmentCIO Media, and is just doing an outstanding job. One of the things that we've talked about internally is we don't want to be the same as everybody else. We want to have 2 major differentiations. One is the content that we put up is going to be different than what the other websites put up, and how we put up that content is different. So you'll see a lot of video, you'll see a lot of animation, you'll see a lot of graphics on our website. And I attributed so much of that to Camille Tutti. So please join me in welcoming Camille Tutti. I know you have to sort of make your way around there. There you go.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. I want to encourage you to use the hashtag Uncle Sam Innovates. So don't put away your phones. Make sure to take lots of pictures. This is such a beautiful venue, so I'm sure you all want to share it in beautiful weather as well. So thank you all for coming here. Like Steve said, innovation is one of the main areas of focus for the federal government, and it has been for the past few years. So we're really going to dive deeper into agency use cases and talk with these innovators about how they were able to make innovation happen. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. So I would like to bring up my first panel. We have Kevin McTague and Dr. Mona Siddiqui from HHS. So please come up here. So I'm going to sit here. Yeah, it's a little weird. All right. So thank you both for coming here and partaking in this event. We are really happy to have you both and everyone else as well. So I'd like you to start by giving me a 30-second elevator pitch on who you are and what you do. So let's start with Kevin.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, there it is. So I'm the director. So Kevin McTighe, I'm the director of the HHS Idea Lab. We sit in the immediate office of the Secretary at HHS, and we have a unique opportunity to view the cross-collaboration needs and opportunities throughout the department of HHS. So I run a suite of programming that is intended to both build the capacity in the workforce to enable more modern practices, so things like design thinking or lean startup or agile execution practices. And I also, in effect, beyond building workforce capacity, also help deliver on projects, some of which we'll probably get into in a few minutes.
Dr. Siddiqui.
Good morning. And by the way, a beautiful venue. I just came from HIMSS and stuck in Vegas for 4 days inside a not, DC waterside building. This is a fantastic way to start the day. So I'm the Chief Data Officer for the Department of Health and Human Services. It's a fairly new position, although the portfolio is not new. As many of you likely know, in the last administration, we released over 1,500 data sets for public use for both entrepreneurs and for researchers. Really, after that, the question was, how are we using data internally for better decision making, for evidence-based policy, for resource allocation? It turns out not so well. As you know, HHS is not a single organization, but a federation of many different agencies, including CDC, CMS, FDA, and others. And there isn't really a way that currently exists that's transparent for how data gets shared and how data gets used beyond the primary reporting purpose of a data collection activity. So my job really is to create a structure for the entire department to begin to use data for evidence-based policymaking. That entails really building a governance structure for HHS around the people, processes, technology needed to have a data sharing process in place. It involves taking a look at the legal framing for how data gets shared currently, and we can talk a little bit about the challenges around that, as well as building an analytics capacity for the department to really feed into the business side of running an organization like HHS. And partnerships around data. So we know that we likely don't have all the data that we would want to have, and that we will need partnerships with other federal departments and with private sector companies to bring data in to HHS that we can start to leverage again for better decision making.
So I want to start by asking both of you, what are the biggest challenges you're trying to solve with innovation? So Kevin?
Yeah, so this is going to be a little abstract, but effectively any large organization, whether it's public sector or commercial sector, is intended to build and run like a machine. It's intended to yield KPIs and known processes. And I am trying to attempt to build a workforce to respond to unknown unknowns. So the biggest challenges for me is to find my team of doers and those who are willing to buy in and really scale the capacity of our 80,000 professional staff members at HHS across all of our federal agencies to enable a mission, whether it's healthcare delivery or the value agenda of healthcare or regulatory science or translational research science or public health interventions in a more nimble way that, going from an 18-month timeline to something to a 2 or 3 week timeline to execute our mission.
There has been really a lack of evidence-based decision-making, and I think the biggest change is really a cultural shift in how data gets viewed. I think we talk about data in the abstract, really, and not tie it to the business of running an organization and the value that is potentially created from using data. So I think that's challenge number one. I would say number two really is It's a bit more into the weeds. It's each agency operates within its own statutory authorities. Each set of data has its own regs and sometimes its own statutes that it's constrained by. And so looking at, even within the HHS family, how can you reconcile some of the legal issues so that SAMHSA and HRSA can share data with each other, even though they might be operating within different statutory authorities. And so the challenge of an outside user, outside of HHS, using data internal to HHS, those challenges are sometimes exactly analogous to the challenges that HHS staff face in sharing data, which is, I think, a really surprising and frustrating piece of the landscape.
So how has the explosion of data changed your role? You've been a CDO now at HHS for almost a year, I believe. So how has that deluge of data and the availability of data and having that availability to open up data, how has that changed how you work?
Yeah, so again, people talk about data in the abstract a lot, and we throw around a lot of different words. But at the end of the day, what I really want to be able to show is how you create value from that data. And so we are looking at use cases like, for instance, the opioid epidemic and how we can start to leverage data from across HHS to move the needle for how we address that epidemic, both from a perspective of how we think about resources and partnering with states, as well as looking at policies that we've historically had and how we can start to reframe some of that conversation.
And, there's innovation for the sake of innovation, but what you're doing is actually saving lives. So can you talk a little bit about the opioid codathon that HHS did? Because that's literally trying to save lives with innovation.
Absolutely. So the opioid codathon we had in December, and it really served three purposes in my mind. The first was, of course, to shine a light on the epidemic itself and the department's commitment to advancing solutions. The second was to show really both the department leadership and staff what is possible with data. So unless you're embedded in this space, data does not mean a lot. And I think it was really great to be able to give people a visual for what it is that we mean when we say data can be used for solutions. And to see 250 people coding for 2 days and 1 night, and Kevin actually stayed overnight to help us manage all of those people. 250 people coding. The HHS secretary stopped by multiple times, staff stopped by multiple times, really curious around what is it that all of these people are doing with HHS data. So I think that was a really fantastic visual for people to start to understand that data is not something that you just collect and then store, but can actually be used for solutions. And then the third piece was really for us to understand what are some of the legal, technical, and cultural barriers to data sharing that HHS faces, and there was a sprint for our team to get a better understanding of that. But the Codathon really placed, I think data was the star of the show. We had 70 data assets from across HHS, from 7 different states, and from Department of Justice, Department of Education, the Census Bureau, and a few other departments, which was fantastic. So it was a real coming together.
I know that one team came up with a tool to track overdoses. Can you talk a little bit about what the teams came up with?
Yeah, so the teams came up with really a variety of solutions, from being able to track pills that have not been used and provide a mechanism to return those to pharmacies, to being able to provide physicians a tool by which they can start to look at their own prescribing patterns. So it was really, we had asked for solutions in 3 buckets. One, prevention, the other was treatment, and the third was understanding usage. And so we had a solution in each of those tracks. And if you go to hhs.gov/challenges, you'll be able to get a good description of the 3 winning teams. And they're continuing actually to work on their products, which is, I think, a great testament to the event itself.
And Kevin, when you and I talked prior in our panel prep call, you mentioned when I asked what is your approach to technologies, you said you have more of a cautious approach to emerging technologies or new technologies. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. So our office, the Chief Technology Office, has been standing since 2008, 2009. And during the early years, there was an approach to evangelize technologies for the early adopters within our workforce. Now I think it's important to institutionalize the way that we either procure emerging technologies or that we broadly adopt emerging technologies. And so we have to recognize that the echo chambers of the skinny jeans and translucent wireframe glasses is no longer just the audience within our own workforce that we're trying to win over. We need to win over the audience within our own workforce that, in fact, are those decision makers with 20 plus years of experience.
And there's another effort called the HHS Startup Days, which aims to open the doors to the startup and entrepreneur community. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks. So the HHS Startup Day came about because we recognized that there was an opportunity to best serve the American people through integrative solutions with companies that can really help us drive value. We've also recognized that it's hard for startups who have found, let's say even scale-ups, right, who have found commercial fit. You're talking Silicon Valley, Austin, whatever your favorite tech hub is, with the best venture capital and the best brands out there. They've yet to find their fit into the .gov landscape. And so we want to help those kinds of companies that can drive value for the American people and effectively our customers best engage with HHS. So if that includes finding a way to go to market through, with HHS, we'd like to be, your genius bar, for lack of a better word. If that includes learning about the FDA regulatory landscape to go to market through HHS, or how Medicare reimburses, or how CDC data sets can improve product quality of your web app, we'd love to engage you as well. So we recognize that there are existing efforts, but we hope that we can really scale this effort. So we started in Washington, D.C. here this past February, and we're going around the country, and we'll be in Boston in just a couple weeks, and then Atlanta and Chicago and Charlotte and Houston, and really wherever anybody wants to host us. So feel free to talk to me about it afterwards.
So in the future, what do you think will be the biggest hurdle to HHS continued effort to innovate?
You want to? So I keep harping on it, but we have a workforce of 80,000 people. I think there are many folks in our community that say, I am the leader in this, and I am the best at what I do. And my aim is to come at this from a servant leadership role in terms of recognizing that I can shepherd those that are excited and build a coalition of the willing. And so again, regardless if it's public sector or commercial sector, a large organization is intentionally built to execute existing known processes. And innovation is clearly a path to validated learning. And so we have to gain buy-in from professionals at the variety of the ranks and enable incentives within our workforce to perform in a modern, nimble way that yields the best approach and best value for our citizens.
Yeah, I would say, one of the biggest challenges for any organization that's as large as HHS is running an effective and efficient operation. And I see this as a challenge not just for HHS, but for any large organization. And it's interesting. I think data is often seen as something separate from the operation side. I think that increasingly that is going to be changing, and the data piece is going to be embedded in how an organization operates on a day-to-day basis. And we are just on the starting leg of a journey. I think that is that has the possibility of really transforming the way that the department operates in the next 15 to 20 years.
Something that's been mentioned over and over again, Steve mentioned it in his remarks, is that partnerships are very important. And so how are you continuing to cultivate those relationships with the entrepreneurial community, the private sector, and commercial partners?
So I'll just say one thing. When I was looking at our data portfolio and bringing in a company to work with us, the one thing I realized fairly quickly was that a lot of the usual suspects, the bigger names, were not the companies that could really address the needs of the portfolio. And so the company that I brought in eventually was new to the federal government.
So what was that? Why weren't they able to?
I think, so in this space, you can tell when somebody is trying to address all your problems and thus will address none. And so, I was looking for a very specific set of skills and experiences, and really had to do my due diligence in looking at some of the smaller companies that perhaps had experience in the private sector and experience in the commercial market, but not necessarily in the federal space, which was fine because they've worked with really large, complicated organizations. And so we figured out, that this was the right expertise. But I think it does take time. I think our office is really unique in that we do understand the value that some of these smaller companies and startups bring, as Kevin said, and do try to partner with them. So that was really, I can say we've actually done that, and it is one of the biggest projects that is currently happening at HHS, and one of the most visible projects. So I think for us to have brought in a company that had, not as much experience in the federal space, I think really says a lot for the department and for the office.
Kevin, do you want to add?
Sure. So GovTech investment in terms of an investment thesis is quite small relative to the broader investor community. So I think it's incumbent upon us to yield integrative solutions and to create an open door platform. In our attempt, at least our first attempt to do this in our office is the HHS Startup Day, or rather one of our attempts to do this is the HHS Startup Day. So my email is kevin.mctigue, MCTIGUE, @hhs.gov. Feel free to email me. We'll create some partnerships.
Great. So when is the next industry day?
Yeah, so our next HHS Startup Day will be held in Boston. It's March 30th.
So I'm going to open up the floor for some audience questions. We have one audience question before I get yelled at here. Okay. Okay, Matt over here. Any questions? Steve Vito.
Can you give that email address again? All right, here it goes. Yeah. So Kevin, Kevin, .mctigue, MCTIGUE, @hhs.gov.
Don't spam him, please. Okay, let's see if there's another question. More question? Yes, sir.
There is, through DIUX and other innovation storefronts, there is a procurement methodology called Other Transactions Authority, which allows very rapid use of streamlined procurement authorities. And for example, Rain Technologies just was awarded a production OT contract out of DIUX. Would that form of acquisition and procurement streamlining approach be useful to the civilian agencies like HHS?
I can jump at that if you.
So I would say I'm less familiar with that, but which authority was that?
It's called OT or OTA, other transactions
So,
authority.
right. There are pockets of HHS, as you likely know, that have OTA. I believe NIH has it, BARDA has it, and one or two other places. And I don't think that it actually applies to all of NIH. But I absolutely think that if there was a larger authority or a larger group of agencies that had OTA, that it would absolutely make some of the acquisition process much easier.
We can take one more question. I'm allowed. Yeah. Well,
nothing on data. That
you have a chief data officer. Now is your chance. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Madeline. I'm with a small company that handles a lot of data for the Census Bureau. And I am curious what upcoming projects you do have or upcoming needs that you do have in terms of data, collecting data, data analysis.
So I would say we're not really looking at new data collection, right? A lot of the data collection activities that any department is engaged in, if you go back, start with some legislation that asks a department to collect information. And so a lot of the data collection activities have existed for 20, 30 years, which is great because you have great longitudinal data, but not so great if you have a question and there aren't any metrics that are getting collected around it and there isn't necessarily a method to start collecting. So I would say, we are looking at really linking data to priority areas like the opioid epidemic, and really linking it to use cases that we can start to demonstrate value from for leadership. So the opioid epidemic is going to be one. We're going to be looking for another use case to start to link data from across HHS. And we're going to be, again, as I said, looking for partnerships. So, reaching out to companies that collect data that might be interested in partnering with us, and unusual sources of data that we might not have access to as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Dr. Siddiqui and Kevin. I appreciate your insight. It's been really, really helpful. So give them a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When we, put this program together and we made our rounds to various companies to get their sponsorship support, Pure Storage just jumped right on it and said, that's what we want to be part of. And Nick Saki is with Pure Storage, and I'm going to take a few minutes and chat with Nick. Really, I've gotten to know Nick. It's a really interesting story. He started off as an infantry soldier in the Army, worked his way up into the intelligence unit within the Army, had a terrific career. He was actually a customer of Pure Storage, liked the company so much he ultimately joined them. So, Nick, thanks for your support, and thanks for being here. I have a question, Nick. Your company is involved in a lot of different areas. What role does Pure Storage have in facilitating innovation within government?
So Dr. Siddiqui pointed out really one of the chief challenges of facing us in government today. It's we've got data. We've got data coming out of our pockets. We get data from everywhere. We share data with each other. That data needs to tell us something. And this is acutely true in the intelligence and national security space, but the value of information has a time component to it. And the faster we can get to the answers we're seeking, the faster we can answer new questions that come up as a result, the more valuable that data is, the more effective, the more efficient our operations are as an agency and as a nation. So the value of data is often bound up in our inability to really access it at the speed we want. And that's what Pure Storage's principal reason for being is how do we enable people to innovate and understand the things that their data has to tell them in a way and at a scale that addresses today's immense data holdings.
One of the things that was just mentioned in the previous panel is that sometimes the procurement process doesn't allow for a lot of, especially smaller companies, to participate, and by the time the government goes through the whole solicitation process. Sometimes they're buying technology that was last year's technology. Yeah. How does Pure Storage handle that?
So that is a great question. I had a mentor of mine who once said, we're buying yesterday's technology with today's dollars to deploy tomorrow. And the other thing that Kevin McTighe said that I observed when I got to the Pentagon was bureaucracies are designed to maintain, but not to innovate. So how does Pure Storage enable this? One of the things that we understood was that customers need to be able to continually rely on the foundations of their infrastructure to modernize, to keep pace with the changes in technology, to implement those seamlessly and simply and non-disruptively so that you can keep working rather than having to stop and change your tires and your oil every 500 feet. And then the longevity that systems have in government is very different than the commercial model. I had a data center down in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I had a 14-year-old storage platform that Sun Microsystems had stopped supporting 7 years before, but it was still working. And it still had data on it that we needed to use, and it was connected to a particular system. So what we do at Pure Storage is we actually modernize the platforms as they age. So every 3 years, basically on a subscription basis for paying the maintenance and sustainment on the system, we upgrade the controllers in place non-disruptively. And this gives our customers a 40 to 60% performance advantage generation over generation. To put it very simply, it is very much the same sustainment model as your smartphone. So every 2 years, you get a new phone, it's upgraded, it's more powerful, all of your data migrates over seamlessly. In this case, we're not even talking about a data migration. But voila, it's working, and you've got a better device. Well,
so there's no downtime.
There's no downtime. So we want to take the risk out of data migrations. We want to take the challenge, the programmatics, the scheduling out of doing forklift upgrades. We want you to be able to work.
Now, Pure Storage has put a stake in the ground, specifically in artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And in artificial intelligence, as obviously it's synonymous with innovation.
Yeah.
In layman's terms, because, you're talking to a layman here, what is it about your technology that enables artificial intelligence to do so well?
So we've been working artificial intelligence in the federal government for almost as long as the idea's been around. Dr. Mate and I were talking, we have a mutual friend in Dr. Cott, who's the chief scientist at Army Research Lab and has been doing artificial intelligence research for 25 years. We are at an inflection point. The ability of compute to actually process huge quantities of data in parallel is real. The software frameworks for making that happen are also readily available. The algorithms for processing the data are open source. But the storage, the data service component of the infrastructure, has to be able to feed the AI engines at a data rate that lets them work efficiently and effectively. This also has to be cost efficient. So we've got that now with memory-based storage too. And that's why Pure Storage makes all of our storage out of flash memory today. Other technologies will emerge and we'll adopt those as well. But you've got to have storage that can keep up with the rest of the components of the enterprise if you want to get a good result out of your artificial intelligence, your data analytics engines, your server virtualization, everything. So that's what
Nick,
we do.
Terrific. Again, thank you so much for your support of this event, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.
If you've stopped at our website, GovernmentCIOmedia.com, and if you've read any of the stories, you will see this byline by Amanda Ziada. Amanda has to be one of the most prolific reporters, writers that I've ever worked with. Amanda, come on up. She is going to be doing our next panel. She is just a terrific reporter for us, out working it. You've probably seen her. Maybe she's called on many of you here. So, Amanda, I'll turn it over to you.
I got to stand down here. Thanks. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Ziada, reporter for GovernmentCIO Media. I'm standing here because we have 4 panelists. So I am introducing the civilian agency panel. But I want to start off by saying please keep tweeting, #UncleSamInnovates, and you can see your tweet up on the screen up here. All right. So like we've been saying, adopting an innovation culture like that of Silicon Valley in government doesn't necessarily always mean flashy new technology. It means transforming internal processes, prioritizing a government IT workforce, and making the citizen government experience seamless, easy, and modern. which are some of the few things we'll be talking about today. So I'd like to introduce my panel. We have Nagesh Rao, Chief Technologist for SBA. Yeah, please come up. All right, and Veronica Villalobos, Principal Deputy Associate Director for Employee Services at Office of Personnel Management. We have Alexis Bunnell, USAID Division Chief for Applied Innovation and Acceleration. And Angelica George, oh, there you are, right in front of me, Senior Policy Analyst for the Office of Management and Budget. Thank you all for coming. And I'd just like to start off the panel by asking each of you to describe a little bit about your role and what you do at your agency. We can start with you, Nagesh.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for having me here today. So my name is Nagesh Rao, and I am currently the Chief Technologist at the U.S. Small Business Administration for the SBIR program, but as of Monday, I got a promotion, so I will become the new Director of Business Technology Solutions, overseeing our Idea Lab at SBA, along with our other mobile application development team. So I'll be overseeing I thought it was like 10, 15 folks. It's now like grown to 50 plus people I'm going to be overseeing on our modernization of IT efforts in the Office of the Chief Information Officer. But in my current role as Chief Technologist, one of my major roles is to help evangelize on America's Seed Fund, a $2.5 billion set aside of R&D funding for high-tech startups and small businesses, and to help demystify the federal government R&D procurement process for grants and contracts. And on top of that, I also oversee our Growth Accelerator program, where we fund accelerators across the country that have that Y Combinator 500 startup mentality, but not necessarily based in Silicon Valley. You know, we're focused on the innovators in Fargo, North Dakota, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. We want to find the diamonds in the rough and help build out the infrastructure for the innovation ecosystems there through our prize challenge.
Veronica.
Thank you. Okay, good morning. Veronica Villalobos. You heard my long title. I'm with the Office of Personnel Management in the Policy Shop, the Employee Services Group. And I'm responsible for all of the human capital planning, the strategic workforce planning, everything that's done to align workforce to strategy, and the cybersecurity workforce strategy. And that has been my honor to work with some of the folks like Angelica, figuring out how you bring together the human capital piece, how do we recruit, hire, retain, develop, and mature all of our employees within the federal space. If you think about our workforce, we have a workforce of 2.1 million. And when we look at the numbers, about 50,000 have some kind of role in cybersecurity, and we know that number is growing. So everything that I do, when I think of all the toys we wish we had to do some of the best analytics around human capital, I'm always the one thinking, oh, and how does this play with the cybersecurity world? So I think we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but I'm excited about things that we're doing around employee digital records and using bots and thinking about how we use technology to enable our work in human capital.
Hi, my name is Alexis Bunnell. I'm with USAID, the international development arm of the U.S. government. And I think I have one of the best jobs on earth because I get to figure out how you blend technology, new approaches, new ideas, and people with solving some of humanity's greatest challenges. And really, to cut to it, I feel like my job is to make our agency more permeable to good ideas, good technology, new partners, and ultimately figure out how we get those things used. I think it's been an interesting opportunity to find new things, but to get them integrated into your culture, into your process, and in our case, into our industry is really what I focus on every day.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Angelica George. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst within the Office of Management and Budget, which is really the purse for the federal government within the federal CIO shop. I'm kind of a jack of all trades. So right now I'm working a lot on the President's management agenda. As we get ready to roll that out, a lot of the approaches that you're going to see focus on modernizing government and transforming, looking at transformative approaches, especially working with agencies like SBA, OPM, HHS, to really try to synergize and really help deliver services through technology innovation to help U.S. citizens really get services in a more efficient and effective manner. Another part of my portfolio is really engaging with our CIOs. So I work with CIOs directly to really hear what their challenges are. And then another part, and we do that, one-on-one, and then also with the CIO Council. And another part of my portfolio is working with the Office of American Innovation. As a lot of you may have heard, that is a newer office. It's, I think, less than a year old, started by Jared Kushner, supported by Chris Liddell. Reed Quarters has left, but Chris is still running the shop. And we're really working and partnering with industry to really figure out, what are our challenges in the federal enterprise? What are the hurdles for our CIOs, our CTOs, our CDOs? What can OMB do to work with the Hill to remove those barriers so that, again, we're delivering transformative technology. So that's my job in a nutshell.
All right, wonderful. So I'd like to start by highlighting an innovation use case that each of you have spearheaded or been a part of in your agency. Alexis, we can start with USAID, the 3 lenses of innovation that we had discussed and how it relates to your most recent initiative.
Yeah, sure. So, I think one of the things in trying to increase, really harnessing the global collective genius, one of the things we've done is really tried to move toward co-creation, prizes, challenges, and different ventures in order to make it easier for the average solver to get connected with our resources. One of the things that many people were really surprised by was a few years ago, we were able to get out the Ebola Grand Challenge in less than 7 days, right? Getting out any vehicle and being able to put it in a really short time period. One of the things we're looking to harness now for that is in 2 main areas. One is our humanitarian grand challenge, so recognizing that humanitarian challenges are things that are impacting people around the world, using those types of windows to get great ideas, test them quickly. And another one is our Women Connect Challenge. So one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that the digital divide between women and men being connected around the world digitally, being digital citizens, is actually growing. And so we're looking to tackle those 2 things. And people often ask us why this model, and the reality is because we get better solutions. The one thing I've learned is that I've never been smart enough to figure out where the right solution is going to come from. We've had Argentinian car mechanics create breech birth solutions. We've had wedding dress designers create the new personal protective equipment. And I think one of the things that I'm learning as we do these types of approaches is the benefit on 2 levels. One is actually the ability to do customer source solutions, right? So to be able to look and to find out from someone in a remote village in Africa who's really dealing with a challenge, and they actually already have a solution. And so being able to connect with those. And the second is really the benefit of this distributed kind of R&D model, being able to test over 1,000 different interventions in a very short period of time. It allows us to manage our risk, but more importantly, figure out what works and scale it so that when we look at our investments on behalf of the American people, they're really about the evidence-driven levels of what works versus maybe what we've always done in the past.
Wonderful. And Angelica, how do you leverage the Silicon Valley innovation mindset in rescaling and upskilling the IT workforce, and as it relates to the president management budget?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we're really looking for right now, and I think this was mentioned in the earlier video, is like partnerships and really learning how Silicon Valley and also our contracting community are not only recruiting folks but reskilling, and that's something that was presented in the FY 2019 president's budget this year in terms of the president's management agenda. Getting a sneak peak of that is really modernizing our IT workforce. So in order, we need more Monas, we need more Kevins, we need more Alexes and Nageshes to come into the government and really help us transform these things. So I would say the biggest thing that we've done in the last year was kind of hiring as one enterprise. The CIO Council held its first government-wide federal IT and cybersecurity workforce event, and it was fairly successful. We definitely still have challenges, and we're still engaging with agencies, but fairly soon, in the next probably 90 days to 6 months, you will see us engaging with industry and academia to really ask you, how can we overcome some of these challenges? What are you seeing that maybe we haven't thought of? And we really encourage you to engage with us in that discussion.
All right. And Veronica, you mentioned employee digital records and bots.
Sure. So one of the things we're looking at is how can we create a holistic experience for employees from the moment they apply and get selected all the way through the time they're wanting to retire. Now, we're not asking you to stay with the federal government that entire time, but what would it look like if all your information was easy to get to, you were able to put in everything you need as an employee without having to fill out paperwork, right? Think of the paper process you go through, and then think about what's happening with cybersecurity and all of the nice work roles that everybody's coding against. Our goal is to get to the point where all of those work roles, all of those competencies are inside that record. We figure out where gaps are so people can get the right training. We can figure out who has adjacent skills, so maybe we need to upskill them, much like thinking about cybersecurity and what Angelica mentioned. And then thinking about how we could then take that same information and create innovative teams where you have people doing cross-functional work across government, working on innovative projects and programs throughout government, and not having to worry about what it means because you're working for one agency or another agency, but having that fluidity between the work. And then imagine when it is time to go in and out of government, all of that information is centrally located. It's not so hard. It doesn't seem so daunting if you want to go try a stint in the private sector and then come back again. So that's the goal of the Employee Digital Record, and how we're going to get there is slowly making sure we have all of our old systems talking, but then creating a new system where you have that fluidity, where it comes to OPM, to make it easier not only for the employee, but to make it easier for the agencies as well to manage that talent. A great example of where we could have used a tool like this, but we didn't have it, was FEMA and the Katrina incident, right? At that time, there were a lot of folks in New Orleans who spoke Vietnamese. But we didn't know what federal employees spoke Vietnamese who would be able to help them work through that process. And so a large call went out to all the different agencies, and these, disparate messages went out asking, are there people out there with these skills who could help us service this group of folks after the Katrina disaster? This would be an opportunity to just be able to go right within that system, pull out who has the skills, and quickly deploy, as opposed to slowly deploy. So that's one of the things we're really excited about doing. What's interesting, though, is I've been working on the cybersecurity work, is I now think about things like cybersecurity and privacy. And when we talk about it, I have the patience to understand we're getting better, but we'll always need to consider those things. I was actually at an event recently, and they talked about how biometrics are going to help us as federal employees be able to do more with our devices, be able to have more flexibility with some of the applications and whatnot. And we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there, and so that's very exciting, but it's always that balance, and it's been an interesting and exploratory process in trying to figure out how we're going to do all this work.
Right. And at SBA?
So I don't think Silicon Valley always gets it right. And that was one thing that when I came into government, I wanted to kind of make sure that we had an understanding that Silicon Valley might have some good role model ethoses to emulate, but I don't think they get it done right. If they did, they wouldn't have messed up with Juicero and all the other flops that come out of the Valley. And I know about half the flops because I saw it when I used to live out there. What I want to iterate though is that as the federal government, so a colleague had asked me, if I'm a startup in Palo Alto, why would I go to the federal government to have access to resources? What benefit would the SBA have for me? And I said, you're right, probably not. But I said, going to Cincinnati, Ohio, going to Nashville, Tennessee, going to Cheyenne, Wyoming, where access resources are not as plentiful as they are in Palo Alto, that's where the federal government can actually step in and help leverage those resources and through the power of public-private partnership. And so I said, it's tapping into those underserved communities and helping them rise up too, to be part of the tide is what's really important. And that's why when we did it with the prize challenge experimentation for the Growth Accelerator Fund competition, we were saying we don't want to fund the accelerators or incubators coming out of Silicon Valley, Austin, and Boston and whatnot that are just doing the same old thing. We want to prop up new innovation ecosystems that are there that the innovators just need a step stool up. They need an opportunity to have their idea validated, and then they can and be pushed and then they will handle it on their own. And so a good example of that in Cincinnati is Mortar. It's a fantastic accelerator for African-American entrepreneurs, and they've been hitting the ground running. And they said, we didn't need the 50K you gave us, but by getting that 50K gave us a steps tool, but more importantly, by having the fact that SBA said, hey, that's a good model that we'll award you guys, they were able to run around and say, hey, the government thinks we actually did something right. So maybe we, there's some validity to what we're doing. I don't know if any of you have heard of Hello Alice.
Awesome.
Yes. So Hello Alice is out of Houston, Texas. It started off as Circular Board by Carolyn Rods and Elizabeth Gore, and it is an AI platform to help female entrepreneurs. They're a female-focused entrepreneurship accelerator program. Carolyn and Elizabeth, when they were starting to get their pieces together, applied for funding for our Growth Accelerator Fund competition. They got their 50K from us, leveraged it, got Dell to buy into what they were doing, and then 3 years later are now rock stars doing Circular Summit and everything else. And the funny part is the genesis point, and they acknowledge it, was SBA stepping in and saying, hey, that's a pretty interesting model, here's 50K. And they built this AI, machine learning, it's not AI, it's really a machine learning tool platform to help assist female entrepreneurs. We have these very success stories when it comes to the accelerators and helping foster the innovation ecosystems. And one of the things I've been trying to point out to the community overall is that, yeah, maybe that drive that Silicon Valley has created is one to emulate, but don't try to copycat everything they're doing, because they don't always get it right. And you really need to be true to your region. You have to be true to the resources around you that work well. And it's the same way with the SBR-funded companies that we work with. A lot of the SBR-funded companies work on really long-term, hard science problems. We're talking about the Ebola challenge, and what USAID did was fantastic. Here's a funny side story. The issue of Ebola started around 2014 here in the U.S., right? That's when everyone was freaking out. CDC steps in trying to figure it out. And there was an experimental drug. Does anyone remember what that experimental drug was when it was being deployed in 2014? The ZMapp drug. It was in the New York Times, created by MAP Biopharmaceuticals. MAP Biopharmaceuticals is a small biotech startup company that got its first funding from the SBIR program, from Health and Human Services and National Institutes of Health. They got their funding, so the drug is being deployed experimentally, and it was a big controversial issue. The World Health Organization stepped in. 2014, they're trying this out because it hasn't gone through full clinical trials. It's derivative from tobacco serum. When did they actually get the funding to start developing the drug? Does anyone know? Around 2012, 2011. When did the solicitation from NIH go out for a request for proposal to deal with an issue around the Ebola drug? Does anyone know? Around 2007. Some program manager at the National Institutes of Health had the foresight to say, we don't have to worry about this today, but we will have to worry about Ebola tomorrow. So let's start thinking about the future today. And that's what the SBIR program, a different construct, is. It's looking at the long-term game solutions. With SBIR, it's funny is that you guys, we're all addicted to this goddamn device. I'm not going to lie. and it's become it's our sixth finger, right? But it's all SBIR R&D funded. Photobit Corporation from NASA SBIR created CMOS Pixel. That's Eric Fossum, who just got the Queen Elizabeth Engineering Prize. Ultrascan Corporation created the biometric technology to touch. That's SBIR funded. Qualcomm's been in the news. That's the microprocessor. That was SBIR funded. If you go to SBIR.gov, you'll see all the old records, so the technologies and how they mapped back. My point is that the federal government will come in at the early onset stages and de-risk and validate. That's, it's one of the biggest things. And one of the things I try to infuse into our culture is we're playing a long-term game, not a short-term game.
I think if I can follow Nagesh, I think one of the things that is so interesting to me is that people here are doing amazing things. Like, if you look at the amount of money that is flowing through this area, this is much bigger than many of the other things that we'd cite. And the concept that we can't do it or that we have to import talent, I think what we have to do is unleash the talent we have. I mean, it has been interesting at USAID to be able to work with our procurement teams, our legal teams, and just set them free. Say, you know, all right, let's think about how we solve this. I think the things that we maybe take from Silicon Valley that I think are really important are more about culture and approach. So, for example, for us, you know, it's about being agile and adaptive and being open to innovation. It's about being evidence-driven. It's about having a bias toward action. But none of those things require a plane ride. Right? I mean, those are things that you have people today on the stage, in this audience, you know, in your groups that are dying to have more fun with what they do, that are dying to be experimental, that can wear funky shoes and still be responsible, right? And so I think what's really important is, you know, recognizing that there's all of these wonderful things we can emulate, and we want to have different talent flows. We want to have these things. But if we just set some of the talent we have here right now, this is going to be Potomac Valley, right? Or Potomac Basin, or make up a cool word. The reality is we have more impact here than almost anywhere else in this country. And I think we need to own it. We need to have pride in it. We need to stop apologizing for it. And we need to maximize it.
Right, wonderful. So very quickly, we only have about a minute left, but I just want to ask each of you for, you know, the greatest challenge that you've had to tackle in these endeavors, and lesson learned or word of advice. So we'll start with you, Angelica.
Can you come back to me?
Sure.
Yeah. Alexis?
I think the greatest challenge was just to stop being afraid, right? I mean, you know, this is a really interesting place, and in many levels, people joke about how it's hard to fire, right, a federal employee. Well, then I should be pretty audacious. I should be able to push the envelope. And I think the other thing was I really had to realize that, you know, whether it's Amazon or Uber, all these amazing companies, they've trained me to be one of the most sophisticated consumers, you know, on the planet. And so I think the question is, how do I take that training into work every day and think about my own customers and think about that experience? And it's all really accessible as long as I'm willing to bring together kind of this life and that life and just kind of, you know, live it all in my day-to-day.
Veronica?
Sure. So I think there's two things, if I can say. One is it's having the patience to know we have to make sure that the information is secure, right? That we are following all the privacy pieces. I think sometimes as a user, we forget, yes, the technology is the enabler and we want it today, but kind of working within the system and understanding there's reasons why we go through a process. It'll get better. We'll get faster at this, but that can be difficult when we're trying to adopt new technologies when you're a federal employee. And for any feds out there, you've probably had that experience, right? On the other side of it is the assumption that we don't have the talent already, because we do have a lot of talented people. In some cases, we need to train on adjacent skills. In some cases, we haven't been responsible to make sure everyone is getting the development that they need, and that's part of it. It has to be a continuous learning environment. And until we do that, we're going to continue to act like the talent's somewhere else when in fact the talent is inside the building, and we just need to make sure they have all the tools that they need.
I think it's, for me, what I've noticed lately, just avoiding the rat race. Just don't worry about the credit. The work gets done, make sure it gets done well. Never worry about the credit. Those in the know. That's all that matters. Those in the know.
Yeah, and I think it just to echo what everybody's saying, I think it's about fostering innovation, collaboration. But even when we're looking at innovative approaches and emerging technologies, we do have to recognize, you know, and assess our risk appetite in the federal government and make sure things are secure. But, you know, like I've said earlier, you know, we are looking hard at OMB at what policies, regulations are hindrances so that our agencies can be more innovative and transformative and adopt these emerging technologies.
All right, well, thank you all so much for your time today. Thank you. All right, so next we have our national security panel with our Director of Marketing, Michael Hoffman.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you for everybody coming and joining us today. We've been really excited about this topic and about this event. So we're going to have one more panel, and then I know it's been a little bit of a longer morning so far. We're going to have a coffee break after this. But first, we wanted to have one of the panels that we're most excited for. It's our national security panel. It's an area in a division of the government where innovation is really taking root, and there are quite a few new initiatives that are going forth. So we're excited to have our speakers, and without further ado, I'm going to introduce them. We're going to start with Molly Kane. Molly is the Department of Homeland Security Director of Venture, Innovation, and Engagement. Before Molly came to DHS, she was involved in the startup community, and she was the Executive Director of Tech Wildcatters in Dallas. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Next up, we'll have Joe Mate. Joe is the former Army Research Lab Chief Scientist. He is currently right now focusing his research on electromagnetics, but for the past 4 years until 2017, he was the Chief Scientist in charge of quite a few initiatives in terms of innovation. Next, we have Christy Monaco. She is the Chief Ventures Officer for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. She's been working in intelligence since 1990, with her career including stops at the Office of Naval Intelligence as well as the Defense Intelligence Agency, and now is working with the National. And I'm actually going to come up to this, come up as well. Let me see if I can do this without falling. All right, so thank you very much for joining us. We're excited to have you. I wanted to start with, I was able to do a bit of an introduction, but wanted to give you some time too to kind of talk a little bit about your program. So can we start with you, Christy?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to GovernmentCIO Media for hosting this event today. It's a great day. First off, I just want to say I was in Silicon Valley last week and picked up some really interesting things. One of the things I picked up was a terrible cold, so I apologize if I've got a little bit of a sniffle, and I've positioned myself in case I have a sneezing fit. So I am NGA's first Chief Ventures Officer, and in that role I'm the Director of the Office of Ventures and Innovation. And our mission is to create partnerships and steer pathways and solutions for inventing new, improving existing, inventing new, and transforming geospatial intelligence capabilities. I don't know how many people in the audience are familiar with NGA. We say NGA, people think National Governors Association or the National Gallery of Art. NGA is one of the members of the intelligence community. We are a combat support agency, so we are in both the intelligence community and the Department of Defense. And we're the people who were kind of doing things with Google Earth before Google Earth existed. We don't own the satellites, but what we own is sort of the analysis of the Earth, activities on the Earth. Our motto is know the Earth, show the way, understand the world. Within the Office of Ventures and Innovation, as I said, we're creating partnerships. So we have things like NGA outposts in Silicon Valley and Austin. We have a lot of partnership activity going on in the DC area, including the establishment of a public-private partnership where we are going to be giving broad access to NGA's geospatial data. We also have a group of folks that I think of as sort of our caddies, and they help people, they help NGA's innovators, and they help bring NGA's problem owners together with solutions, and using lean startup methodologies, move those into the system. One of the interesting things with OVI is that we have both sort of enterprise innovation activities, but we've also folded in NGA's component acquisition executive activities, bringing these two capabilities together that most people don't think, hey, those connect really well. At the end of the day, when you're acquiring something, what you're trying to do is bring in a new capability, so it made sense to us. And then finally, we have responsibility for arrangements like OTAs that were discussed earlier, other transaction authority, and cooperative R&D agreements, CRADAs, and the public-private partnership. Ways for us to be able to reach out to industry and academia and do a better job of innovating alongside our partners.
All right, Joe.
Hi, Joe Mate. I've been providing technical leadership at the Army Research Laboratory for 30 years. As a researcher, but as indicated up until recently as the chief scientist. And I do want to pick up, ARL, we do foundational research. So in response to a comment that was made in the previous panel about somebody at NIH putting out something, an SPIR, There was a researcher there, a government employee, who was doing that work, and since they pulled out the iPhone, I know Eric Fossum, and I can rightfully say that my research DNA is in the optics of the camera that is in here. So we really look far out. I'm listening to people talk about innovation, but in research, you really have to be thinking far, far ahead. So, I mean, for example, if we had not started looking at autonomous vehicles in the mid-90s, there would not have been a DARPA Grand Challenge. There would not be all the hype about autonomous vehicles. We were looking at that in the mid-90s. Now, we do foundational research, but we recognize that just working in a laboratory is not enough. We need to interact with our colleagues, and we actually want the technologies that we're working on, I mean, for example, this, to transition. So collaboration has been in our DNA since the establishment of the Army Research Laboratory. In 1995, we established a program called Federated Labs that was a government, industry, and academia partnership. It is now called a Collaborative Research Alliance, but we have continued that for over 20 years. Now, the world has changed in those 20 years, and in 2013, our new director, Tom Russell, wanted us to take a deliberate look at our collaborative efforts. We developed some strategic initiatives. One of those that I led was to identify our essential research areas. For the entire time that I had been at ARL, we did not have a strategic vision for our research. Now I can tell you what our essential research areas are. At the same time, we developed a program called Open Campus, and that was to do the things that we had been doing, but to do it in a strategic way. Basically, to tell the outside community that we are open for business, that we are interested in collaborating both, as partners on the research, but also on the tech transfer. And last year, the Defense Science Board highlighted ARL's Open Campus as an innovation exemplar.
Okay. Molly?
Right when I take a drink.
Good timing.
I'm Molly Kane. I'm the Director of Venture and Innovation for Homeland Security, and I too am in the first role that they've had there. I was recruited out of Austin, and I was giving a loudmouth talk to some government feds who I had no idea who they were. And at the end of the breakfast, they offered me a job, and I said no, because why? And 3 weeks later, over a Tex-Mex dinner, they came back, convinced me of the mission, and the rest is history. So I've been with Homeland for about 1.5 years now. Our program is still in its fledgling stage, but one of the biggest things, and I'll piggyback on both of you guys, it's the implementation of innovation, and that's what we say is our mission. And there's no shortage of amazing R&D projects, but we don't want them to live on the shelf. We want them to plug in. We want them to be used by our front line, and so that's the main priority. And then, piggybacking on what you said, is I like to lovingly call it mission matching. So I sit down with our CIOs and discuss with them, what are your missions today? What are your missions tomorrow? And let's talk about what you might not know. Tell me your mission now, and then let me introduce you to a venture guy who can tell you that you need to be looking at something 10 years out. So that's a little bit of what we do.
Okay. Well, this question is for Christy and Molly. I wanted to start, you guys are starting new positions, within your agencies, and a lot of it has to do with the outreach to places like Silicon Valley and some of the venture firms out there. So I was wondering if the relationships that you guys have been able to develop with the venture capital firms have been productive, or have they been in some ways created more challenges going forward?
I love talking to the venture capital firms because the decision processes that they go through to decide in whom to invest are very similar to the decision processes that we put into deciding what capabilities to bring into NGA. And one of the things that VCs have done for us that's been particularly useful has been introducing us to companies who might be able to leverage the geospatial data. We have petabytes of geospatial data that is basically sitting, waiting to be exploited for development of things like AI algorithms and computer vision. So VCs are filling a really interesting kind of matchmaking space for us in that regard.
Molly?
So the Fortune 500 world has leaned into venture for quite some time, as all of you know, and there's no shortage of awareness of what Homeland Security does. So that's easy for me. Everybody knows what TSA and FEMA and Secret Service, they know what their main and priority missions are. So the venture guys, they roll up into our office and they say, I've got these 3 companies you've got to know about, and they know exactly what we're hunting for without us asking for it. So it's a really beautiful way to engage that relationship. And then there's no shortage of startups, and the best part of this job is that they deliver the use cases for me, and that helps me sell it to our guys. So if they can explain it to me in a layman's format that this is why FEMA needs to know me, I can tell FEMA the same thing. So it's a wonderful relationship.
Wonderful. Joe, you mentioned the Open Campus program, but I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about that. I think it's one of the more exciting programs that exist right now within the government, and I don't think enough people know about it, quite frankly. Could you talk a little bit about what that means and maybe how you picked where to establish, or not you specifically, but the Army Research Lab picked the Open Campus programs to go? Because I know one just opened in Boston, is that correct?
It will be, yes. Open Campus, where it came from, the notion is, as I said, we are open for business. What the thinking was, looking back toward 9/11 and how we responded to that, the focus was on security. We were still interested in collaboration, but if we're collaborating with universities and where universities have a large number of foreign graduate students, coming in through the front gate is very intimidating when you have to go through all that security. And what happened was we were slowly retreating behind large walls, the service laboratories. While we were doing that, the world was globalizing. And what we recognized is if we continued this way, the labs would continue to do relevant work, but would it really be cutting edge? We needed to be connected to the outside world to know what's on the leading edge. To do that, we had to get rid of some of those physical barriers, and we had to let people know we are open to collaboration. So there is still a guard at the front gate, but we have implemented processes inside the laboratory so that if we're working with a professor who has a foreign student, a foreign national as a student, they go through a vetting process, but now with the appropriate badge, they walk into the building just like everybody else. They're working with our staff, they have access to the building, not complete access, and this lowers the threshold. People see that it is easy to work with us. So that's inviting people in. What we've also done is we've pushed our people out. The labs through BRAC, we are primarily located at Aberdeen Proving Ground and at Adelphi, Maryland, and our director wanted our people to get out. And we now have what we call our extended sites. This is actually the anti-BRAC. We have ARL West in Los Angeles, ARL South in Austin, ARL Northwest in Chicago, and as mentioned, we just opened up ARL Northeast. And we have, these are not just offices, this is laboratory space. We have people who are there on site. The first site that we chose was Los Angeles because of, looking at information, human information interaction. Being in Los Angeles was actually a better place than being up in Silicon Valley. That's where the talent was. And it's one thing to, somebody who has lived in that area to try to convince them to come to the East Coast is difficult, so we go out there. Austin is attractive because of the venture capital environment. Our original reasons for looking at Chicago were some facilities from the Department of the Energy, and Boston was also a very natural one, given the schools, given the venture capital, the small companies that are out there. So we have people that are now outside of Maryland who are interacting, and in fact, we have been pushing our people to think internationally. We have sent people to universities overseas, so it's not just domestic.
I think he actually nailed it on the head with the Silicon Valley is a concept now. It's not just in this one little pocket of Mountain View, California. The taxes are more attractive in Texas. Whoop. But DC needs early stage technology. They need tech talent, or we need tech talent. And little pockets of America everywhere are popping up, and the venture capital guys see that, so they're investing in it. So.
Well, yeah, and Christy, you mentioned outposts. How is NGA picking some of those outposts? In fact, I think NGA's got a unique program in Huntsville, Alabama, which a lot of folks wouldn't really think of as being a real center for technology, but you guys have really developed that area, that tech hotbed there.
Right. So we have outposts right now in Silicon Valley and Austin, Texas, and actually we're getting ready to grow our Austin, Texas outpost. The Huntsville relationship you mentioned is really more of a relationship that has been built over time, focused on what we and the city of Huntsville can do to cooperate, create a partnership around disaster relief. It's sort of one of those things that you can kind of put in place ahead of time, and that way, you know, God forbid something happens in Huntsville, we've got that relationship already there. One of the things I did want to jump on was the idea of we've got the outposts that are sort of NGA's ambassadors out. But one of the programs that NGA is putting into place is something called the Explorer program. The idea behind this is you can come work at NGA, but you might not actually need to physically come work at NGA. We're seeking, because a lot of the folks in Silicon Valley, what they want to do is work on the nation's really hard problems. And my golly, NGA has really tough challenges to work through, and a very, very compelling mission. So what we're creating is this program that says, hey, stay where you are, but telework in with NGA. There's a lot that can be done with, even though we're an intelligence agency, a lot of work that we can do at the unclassified or FOUO level. So we're looking at ways to hire what we're calling these explorers. They could potentially stay in place and work on some of our hard problems. Hire them for maybe as like a term employee for just a couple of years. And then when they leave NGA, we think of it as kind of like Peace Corps for NGA. When they leave NGA, and then they go to either create their own startup because they've gained insight about some of the nation's national security problems, or they want to go back and do something else with their career, they have something that differentiates themselves from all of their other peers who may have stayed in Silicon Valley and continue to work on traffic routing algorithms or name your AI for a larger company in Silicon Valley.
I'm actually that employee. For the first year and a half, I've been based everywhere that's not DC, and that's what they told me when they interviewed me. We don't want you to get Fed head. And so I don't live here. And I tried to buy that URL, and it's not available. But I'm relocating now because our department is actually growing, and it's necessary. But I've got a team on the ground here, and then it's either California or New York or Texas or Alabama. Birmingham is hot right now with tech. But it's everywhere. So we shouldn't just shop here. Is kind of the concept.
Well, speaking of Texas, you just returned from South by Southwest last week, and I was asking you what stood out for you from going through that, and you mentioned robotic process automation. Tell me why.
I am nerding out on that topic right now. Everybody is talking about AI, and I think these two are probably farther advanced on AI than Homeland Security is, but and there are absolutely sectors of Homeland Security that have embraced it and are using it quite wisely. But if you go one step back, that's machine learning, and you go another step back, and that's robotic process automation. Everything you hear about in the press about the government, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, is slow and crappy process on everything. And it takes me like 6 months to get paid back for a dinner. And that's so aggravating. So now I just pay for my own dinners. But there's so much that we can do. And I actually target the projects that our executives say, we need more resources, we need more human bodies and seats. And I'm like, that's perfect for RPA. So that's what we're tackling right now. It's not a job replacer. The best description that I got recently was it's taking the robot out of the human. So if you've got anybody in your department that is monotonously ruining their life with a button pressing, that's the perfect project. So that's what we're trying to tackle that and save millions of dollars with it.
Great. Joe, we talked a little bit about tech transfer, and that's been something that the Army Research Lab has been trying to do really well. For those who don't know, tech transfer, the idea is really take the research that the Army has been invested in, take that IP or intellectual property, and then allow entrepreneurs or businesses turn that into actual products or gear on the battlefield. So, Joe, can you talk a little bit about how Army Research Lab is trying to do a better job with that?
Definitely. Good example of that is the IP store that we now have. It's on the website. I have that address. I haven't committed it to memory. But what we have done is we have placed patents that are ARLs, and it's basically like going shopping. It's an automated process, and you can say, I'm interested in licensing this intellectual property. There's some boilerplate about the licensing agreement. This has been open since October of 2016. We have had 4 agreements that have been processed that way. I'm here to, advertise that it is out there. And that's one of the things that I said, we looked at our outreach and our collaborative efforts from a strategic standpoint. And one of the things that we have really put a lot of effort into is establishing strategic CRADAs. I understand that this is probably an industry audience, but we have approached universities in a strategic way, saying, we'll do an umbrella CRADA with you. This is a cooperative research and development agreement, and once we have that established, all the IP, all of the legal agreements have been agreed upon. And then if I know somebody at Virginia Tech and I want to start a project, all we have to do is agree on what that project is. Now we have about 180 partners, CRADA partners. There are about 360 projects. Half of those partners are academia, half of those partners are industry, but we have, over the past 4 years, the growth in our CRADAs has increased exponentially because we're going out and we are attempting to be strategic in working with partners outside.
So one of the things about CRADAs because we're growing the number of CRADAs that we do as well, and one of the things that I think is very interesting, about CRADAs is that we approach a lot of startups about CRADAs and say, look, we know that for you guys, that for a startup company, R&D is a very capital-intensive activity. And you can sort of buy down the cost on your own R&D by partnering with us to do some collaborative R&D, save your capital for something else that you may need it for, and at the same time, start to build your track record with the federal government so that when you're ready to compete for an opportunity, you've got a past performance history. Being able to speak to startups in the language that they understand about these kinds of novel relationships is, I think, one of
a research laboratory. We have had startups on site, and in fact, we are looking at building in Adelphi a separate building across from the main lab where there would be space that we would invite them, and you'd say, you can be here. Puts puts you in proximity to us. We already have a company on site at Aberdeen looking at additive manufacturing.
So one of the topics in the news right now is clearances, security clearances specifically, and that is something that, when people think of national security, they think of classifications, clearances, and what have you. It almost seems like there's an overclassification problem. Everything is classified secret at this point. How, in terms of attracting startups, attracting new companies, attracting tech companies that might be outside of the government, how do your agencies kind of deal with that issue?
I'll jump in. I mean, when people think of the DoD, that's immediately what they think about. Oh, classification. I work for ARL. Oh, everything you do must be classified. The truth is, all of my work has been published out in the open. We are a fundamental research laboratory. So if you're coming in on the ground floor, you cannot classify basic research, 6.1. So that's actually the entree. We're open. As you move toward an application, then things get darker, but we are attracting people because we do basic research, which is not classified.
I was having this conversation with an accelerator just yesterday that it's actually a big myth that startups don't know that the government, and I'm not trying to contradict him on stage, but I'm about to, that the government is open for business. It's actually that they have no idea how the hell to work with us. They think they're competing with IBM, so then it's much easier to go to Toyota, and they don't want to get into that hairy situation that is always talked about of, oh my God, the government has paperwork and this and this and this. That part's true, but we deal with that. It's pretty simple on their end. They just wait forever. So, yeah.
And I do want to say, I understand what the impressions are. I mean, what we do is we recognize we have partners. We want our partners to succeed. We are open. We will make it easy for these people to work with us. That's part of that strategic change.
Yeah, the collaborative conversation and that's what our office is trying to do as well, is let us tell you in real, regular language that this is actually what we're asking for. Skip all 400 pages of that solicitation, and here's one sentence. We need Microsoft 365. Something simple like that. And that's the conversation that we keep having with startups is just ask questions, and then also listen to us whenever we're out on the streets and talking about it. They don't know that we're also regular businesses. We need HR services, we need health services, we need shipping services, we need PINs, we need all kinds of things. So they kind of forget that part.
And for us, it's about translating intelligence use cases into commercial use cases. And with geospatial data being the backbone of so many of the apps that we use and so many programs, we actually can leverage really well, particularly our folks in the outposts, who are in fact, our outpost in Silicon Valley has people who don't work directly for me. They work for their home directorate. So I've got somebody from our analysis directorate and somebody from our source directorate. They are real practitioners of geospatial intelligence, so they understand the problems in an intelligence context and both speak the language of Silicon Valley and are gifted in translating use needs from more of like a classified use case to a commercial use case.
Can I pipe in one more? I think one of the big things, and I know that our offices of venture that are opening up are actually creating a more collaborative society within our organizations. We recently launched I'm going to say it the right way, Emerging Citizen Tech Council, and that's hosted by GSA, but it's chaired by Homeland Security, I think National Archives, State Department. We meet monthly, and there are over 200 participants and organizations, state, local, and federal. You guys are both in it. I don't know if you knew that. Your people are in it, and they're wonderful. But it is a sharing across the table, because when a startup asks me a question and it's not a fit for me, I need to refer both of their programs. And we are actually turning DC into more of a Silicon Valley in that respect. they do swap deals across the table that way. And we should be doing that more often. So that's the cool thing about our office's opening.
Absolutely. I think we have a chance for 1 or 2 questions. If you don't mind just waiting for a microphone, if you can raise your hand. All right, Camille.
This is actually a question for Christy. NGA also has really innovative approaches to bring talent in from the outside. Pre-vetted candidates come to NGA for a half a day or whole day, and they work together in a group setting to solve problems. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Trading microphones up here. Yeah, so I spoke earlier about the Explorer program, which is our program to bring folks in on the Peace Corps for NGA. We've also are doing things like challenges and hackathons that many of the organizations that are similar to us are doing. We've got a challenge going on right now, and I won't steal the DIUX's thunder. I know they're up shortly, but
There are 2 panels later.
yes, but the X, ask them about it. The XView challenge, which is a challenge where we have basically released something like 1 million basically bounded box structured observations on commercial imagery about covering kind of 60 different data classes and over 1,400 square kilometers of the Earth. This is basically an immense training set to allow companies to participate in this challenge, and through DIUX, if they win the challenge, they win something, I think it's like $100K or credits on AWS. So looking at those unique ways to, without actually having to come to work at NGA, work on NGA's problems.
We had a question in the back.
Good morning, Kevin Cummins with PSC. Earlier, there was talk about CRADAs and OTA, other transaction authority, for bringing the innovation and buying it, as the government buying the innovation. OTA is traditionally used for R&D prototyping, although DoD does have production authority. Other agencies don't necessarily have that. Can you talk a little bit about how, once something's been identified, whether it's a startup or something that the government is helping prototype with a private partner, about ingesting that technology, and if you could speak to that.
So NGA's OTA is brand new. We awarded our first OTA agreement in December. What is really interesting, what's really interesting about the fact that the OTA that we awarded in December is leveraging this authority, but it's for a project called Project Sagittarius, which is an AI development using data and using commercial algorithms and government-developed algorithms to do some object detection, basically. And Project Sagittarius was a project that came up as sort of an intrapreneur challenge. So NGA has something called the NGA Innovation Experience, where we are, and shout out to Alexis earlier, who talked about tapping into the talent that's within. We've got this experience that is saying, hey, you guys have some great ideas. Let's surface them, and we nurture these programs through Lean Startup. As part of nurturing Project Sagittarius, we said, hey, our OTA is a great venue for you to get the AI that you need. So that's ongoing. And then what we're doing in the meantime is looking down the road, partnering that project with our program offices to say, hey, this is coming for, this is in your mission space and it's coming for you. Let's make sure that down the road, when it's time to integrate it, let's assume this pilot or this prototype succeeds, and let's start planning now for the integration of that.
All right, I think that's all the time we had for this panel discussion. We're now going to have a 10-minute coffee break and lavatory break. For those that don't know, the bathrooms are downstairs. The men's and women's rooms are downstairs. We have coffee back there, and we'd like to just kick off in about 10 minutes or so. We got 3 more panels. We're all very excited for them. So thank you very much to the speakers here.
Thank you.
And keep on going.
Folks, can you find your seats, please? We're going to begin the program. Folks, please find your seats. Hello. Everybody, please find your seats. Hello. Hello. I'm going to start singing if you don't sit down. We're gonna begin our program. We fell about 5 minutes behind. Anthony, come on up. Please find your seats, grab a cup of coffee or a muffin, and have a seat. We are going to reconvene. Is everybody enjoying the proceedings so far? Isn't this a terrific program? A major part of this goes to Camille and Mike, who you saw up here, and Andy Andrews, and just a terrific team. So congratulations to them putting this all together. We got plenty of seats in the front here. Well, welcome back. Do you have a microphone? Okay. I'm standing next to Anthony Robbins. He probably doesn't need much introduction to many of you. Anthony is the Vice President of Public Sector for Nvidia. And, you know, the theme again for this event is innovation. And all these 5 companies that have stepped up, they have innovation in their DNA. But it's certainly true with Nvidia. Nvidia is a high-flying company out of Silicon Valley, and Anthony heads up their public sector effort in North America. Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Nvidia is doing in government, and what does Nvidia manufacture and sell? Well, let's start there.
First of all, I think we were just renamed. Did you guys get that? Like, what are you, like a New Yorker or something?
I beg your pardon, Providence.
With all due respect, right? So Nvidia is a startup. I like to look at it. But you know, interestingly, we're 25 years in the business. You know, we've only got 11,000 employees, about $10 billion in revenue, and interestingly, and I'll tell you why it matters, $150 billion market cap. Right, so I'll let you think about that. So 11,000 employees with a market cap that's the size of IBM's. So why is that? There's 3 things I thought I would offer just to share. So kind of who are we? How did we get here? And what happens next? So we're a company that began focused on the graphics business. And so some of you all may know that, you know, the 3D graphics business very well. Nvidia got their start by licensing graphics library from Silicon Graphics in like 1994. Why does that matter? Because at the time, there's about 40 graphics companies on the planet. There's not that case today. I don't know what there is today, maybe 4. So Nvidia began building a business that was bringing graphics to the marketplace, leveraging open graphics library from Silicon Graphics early on, and they found themselves in the gaming business. How many of you have kids? Go ask your kids what they know about, you know, Nvidia from a gaming business. Gaming, how big is gaming? It's $100 billion a year. That's what the gaming business. So when you wonder about why you're spending so much money on your kids, you know, game consoles and toys, that's why it's a massive freaking business. It's very large. And then there's 200 million gamers that use Silicon Graphics technology. So what we built was a $4 billion business around gaming. We found that launched ourselves into this the really high-end graphics. Anybody go to movies? Anybody go to movies watching 3D? And anybody see a lot of really high-end cool graphics? Almost unilaterally, 100% of those movies use Silicon Graphics OpenGL technology combined with what is today all the Nvidia product. Now, all of that led us to the development of what we call a GPU, graphics processing unit, and then a programming environment we call CUDA. You don't have to remember any of the technical stuff. You can ask somebody about it later. But what has happened is the same processing that had enabled games and graphics was material to artificial intelligence. So that's why I gave you the little backdrop there, okay? So, and you'd have to have your head in the sand to not understand that artificial intelligence is being deployed in greater capacity and speed than anything that has occurred in the IT business in the world in our lifetime. Every single person in this room, every single person in every single country, every single company in every single country around the world is going to be dramatically impacted by the role of artificial intelligence in people's lives and in businesses that we're in, including the federal government. So I couldn't be more excited to be representing, and how did you say it? Nvidia. And because I happen to have spent...
I'm not from New York, by the way,
Yeah.
but don't insult me like that.
Okay, but you're close. I love Steve. So, but the point, so in my career, I've spent 30 years covering the federal government living in Maryland, and then I have spent 30 years doing that work for Silicon Valley-based companies, Silicon Graphics, Sun, and then today, Nvidia. So
well, let me put you on this. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. To the extent you can, where are some of the implementations of your product within government? Where's it being utilized?
Well, so let me tell you. So the use cases that where artificial intelligence plays in the federal government are many. I'll blast through a couple of them. In civilian agencies, obviously healthcare. Healthcare is going to be revolutionized by the role that AI is going to play because of the massive amount of data and so much work to be done there. Waste, fraud, and abuse. The U.S. spends $147 billion a year of your taxpayer dollars. $147 billion a year on waste, fraud, and abuse. That's a public number, and artificial intelligence will help go. I mean, the IRS alone spends $22 billion a year, or is exposed $22 billion a year in tax fraud alone. Massive opportunities. Last year, we spent $306 billion in responding to natural disasters in the U.S., and that was $306 billion. FEMA has a big role, right, in that, and it was inspired by the hurricanes that we dealt with. Artificial intelligence is going to have a role in weather prediction, you know, how insurances do assessments, how we provide drones and many other things to figure out how we do rescue, safety, response, and the like. So that's civilian agencies. Inside of the Department of Defense, there's 3 or 4 use cases. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. You probably know something about that. If not, just Google it. You'll see it. Literally Google it. And then logistics, the whole transportation business will be profoundly impacted by artificial intelligence. We could go forward. Platform sustainment. The #1 issue in the Department of Defense is cost. Right? The #1 program in the Department of Defense is the Joint Strike Fighter, and it's been publicly talked about how they need to address the sustainment cost of the Joint Strike Fighter. Once they figure that out, there'll be a metaphor there for how they go and deal with, you know, artificial intelligence, big data analytics across the platform sustainment across all of the branches of service. Cyber is an obvious one. Right, so whether it's offensive, defensive, or resilience, cyber is another opportunity. So there's 3 or 4 use cases in DoD.
And you were mentioning to me that you're flying out later today to go back to the headquarters to brief the CEO on public sector and government.
I did. Wish me luck.
Well, again, let's thank Nvidia and Anthony Robbins for our support today. And we are ready for our next panel. I wonder if we could have them come up. And please join me in welcoming Camille Tootie back to the stage. Camille. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. So I will bring up Greg Toohill and Megan Metzger. Please come on up. Give them a round of applause, please. Okay, it's going to be nice and cozy here, so, okay. So I want to give you the same opportunity I gave my previous panel. Why don't you start, Megan, talking a little bit about who you are and what your organization Decode does.
Sure, so thanks so much for having me today. Gorgeous, gorgeous venue, by the way.
I'm going to buy this place.
I think so.
I think so, and move in here, yeah.
Can everyone hear me?
Try this one.
How about, oh, there
Much
we are.
better, yeah.
All right, so like she mentioned, I'm with Decode. So we are what we call an IT accelerator, and our sole mission is really focused on kind of the whole theme of today's event, which is that private sector technology and emerging tech coming out of the major tech hubs could really impact the way that the government operates on a day-to-day basis. But the barriers to entry are high. So part of our mission is how do we de-risk the government for emerging tech so that they look at the market and actually want to begin to engage and solve some of these really hard-hitting mission problems. And at the same time, as a byproduct of that, how do we de-risk technology for all the federal folks in the room that are, I find, increasingly looking for using better tech, but also perceive there to be barriers in the reverse. So we run 5 programs a year where we select only 6 to 10 technologies, and we center them around themes. So we cover everything from IoT and mobility to artificial intelligence and things as basic as cloud and DevOps.
Greg.
Well, good morning. I'm Greg Toohill. I'm the president of 6 Terrace Federal Group. And 6 Terrace really is a startup, having been birthed back in May, and the Federal Group in the 1st of November. We're actually the result of several mergers and acquisitions, and we're the 2nd largest data center operator in North America and the 3rd largest in the world. But we are a whole lot more than that, because our company has the approach of your information's everywhere. It's on-prem, it could be co-located in one of our data centers, or it could be in the cloud. So we have the approach that our tools, our capabilities, and the like can help you scale across all of those environments to better secure your information, regardless of where it is.
And for those of you who don't know, Greg was also the first federal CXO, and he's pretty much the main reason most government agencies now have 2-factor authentication. He led that effort.
Yeah, it's not enough, though.
But there can be more work done, right? So over the recent few years, there has been a big movement to be more innovative in government. So if you were to give the government, the federal government, a letter grade on how well it's actually innovating, what grade would you give it? Megan?
Oh boy. Well, I will. So first, I do want to say, I started Decode 2 years ago, and even just the wave of change inside the government with the hunger for innovation has really changed. But I might have to grade on a bell curve. Okay. We've got folks like our previous panel that are really pushing forward and leaning, and then we have people on the other end that are kind of stuck in old processes and ways and a little bit scared to take some risk and lean forward. And then we have people in the middle that want to do something but are still beholden to process and cultural challenges. So, it's kind of a swing right now. There's some outliers for sure, but I might go with a D.
That bad?
Well, I'll disagree respectfully on that. I think we've gone from an F- to a solid C-. But, as you take a look at it, there's still a lot of impediments out there. And, we were talking beforehand. 11 years ago, I helped co-write a book called Commercialization of Innovative Technologies, bringing good ideas to the marketplace. And, as part of that, we looked at an innovation team really being the successful approach to take in bringing good ideas to fruition. You got to have your inventor, but often inventors can't carry the ball across the line and close. How many of you folks know Philo Farnsworth? Anybody know that name? Yeah, 1. 2. Yeah, and both the guys related to the Army. Good on you there. Cool. Philo T. Farnsworth was a Utah farm boy who ended up going to Stanford for a year and said, you know what, I'm going to drop out of Stanford because I have this idea for a business. He was the inventor of the television. And how many of you know about Philo Farnsworth? He died penniless because he couldn't get it across the line. So you really need to have a team approach with an inventor, with a financier, with a technologist who can help it scale and get it manufactured. And then you also need an entrepreneur, somebody who can quarterback that team and bring everything together. And I don't think across the government we have yet put together that team approach to innovation, although we have some great pockets of excellence. They're getting those A+ right now, and I think that's going to inspire others to adopt that team approach to innovation. And I think we are priming the pump now to really have an explosion in innovation here in the government. We're going to need Congress's help, frankly, to help give the right authorities to move faster than what we're doing now.
Yeah, so maybe you don't want to take my class, a harder teacher, but if we're going to give superlatives, I might give the government the most improved award.
That's the silver lining, always seeing from the bright side. So, Megan, the first real question is really, since you are at the very intersection of government and the private sector, there were some concerns that under the new administration, emerging tech companies wouldn't be as inclined to work with the government. Did you see any of that?
Yeah, really interesting question. And truth be told, we kind of, as an organization, said, well, strap in. We're not sure what's going to happen here. And a couple of things. I mean, in full candor, right after the election, we actually had a couple of companies drop out of the upcoming program. Now, in full disclosure, they were doing big data on climate change. So it was a smart business decision. But largely what I've actually found is companies are leaning in. And I think a couple of things at play. One, the movement across government, politics completely aside, is very apparent. You know, our presence out into the innovation hubs, kind of like Molly spoke about earlier, is being felt across industry. But at the end of the day, regardless of who's in office, veterans need better services. We need to get our tax returns without all the billions of dollars of fraud. You know, we need to protect our troops, and we need to stay ahead of our adversaries like China, who's investing heavily in AI. So I think between the mission of what we need to accomplish as a country, and truthfully, even though budgets are getting cut, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that I think most companies realize they can't ignore. So we've actually seen a little bit of an uptick for some of the more innovative things.
So that was actually a trick question. There hasn't been much of a decrease in the interest, but more of an interest for the Trump administration to work with private sector companies, as we've seen with organizations like the Office of American Innovation. So she did a very nice job with that. So Megan,
I passed. I got an A.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the acquisition infrastructure. Is there acquisition infrastructure in place to allow these tech companies, especially outside the Beltway, to do business with government?
I feel like this is another trick question, but so you've heard a lot today about OTAs and BAAs and the uptick of CRADAs. There are definitely some very interesting acquisition vehicles that are being put in place. We see a lot of challenges, you know, on challenge.gov that are really interesting. So some constructs are there. I think they're starting to increase. They're not prevalent. So we still run into, even with some innovation offices that we work with across government, that are really trying to push the envelope, they still pause when we get to the part of how do I get to you? And we're still having to coach our companies that we work with on the several different ways that you can get in. You know, find a soup partner, maybe go through Fastlane to get on schedule or call up a distributor. You know, we're still having to come up with really innovative ways to work within the confines of the FAR, but walk up to that line and try to get some things done when they don't have access to some of those more innovative procurement vehicles. Now that said, I think there's a big push. So, you know, I know DoD, for example, is doing some big trainings coming up soon on how to educate the leadership teams and some of those down in the ranks on the use of more innovative contracting vehicles. And we even teach a course on it too.
And Greg, you're nodding. Do you want to weigh in on this as well?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the FAR. I like the intent. But
is anyone?
Well, there actually, yes, because there's a whole industry that has sprung out from just helping folks wade through the FAR. And frankly, I think that's a hashtag sad issue itself. You know, frankly, if I take a look at the Wright brothers and the procurement of the first airplane by the U.S. Army Signal Service, the request for proposal was 4 pages, 2 pages front and back, and we got an on-time, on-budget delivery of that. Could we do that today using the FAR? I don't think so. So I think it's time to make our acquisition great again, and let's...
That's another hashtag.
Yeah. But the fact of the matter is you know, it's too complex, and it's really stifling innovation in a lot of places, and that's why we're seeing OTAs and others become an increasingly attractive option for departments and agencies who want to get things done quickly. Because if the FAR is producing, in some cases, a decision and procurement cycle that exceeds 3 years. If you need something today, you don't want to wait for the FAR to deliver something years from now where you've already gone through maybe 1 or 2 generations of capability.
And I want to play off something that Greg said earlier, which is this is a big area where I think Congress can have a tremendous impact, because your acquisition force, a couple of things at play. I'm constantly surprised on how many contracting folks that we work with that just actually aren't even aware of how to leverage OTAs and BAs and things like that, because they're so overburdened because they're understaffed. They don't have time to take the training and understand different ways to leverage it, but also top cover. I mean, the FAR had great intentions. Let's make sure we're not scamming the government and making deals with our buddies. But what's come down is they want to make sure no one goes to jail and we don't get protested and we're being good stewards and we don't end up in the post. So the post test, right? Yeah. But the unintended consequence is it's stifling and blocking a lot of great tech from getting in.
Yeah, and I agree. The fact of the matter is if you printed out the FAR, it's taller than both of us. And isn't it sad that we have to set up, like in the Defense Department, and I'm a retired general officer. I actually had to take a couple of courses through Defense Acquisition University. Why do we have something so complex to go buy something that we have to set up a university for it?
They call it bathroom material, right?
It's noble, and we should, in fact, have procedures in effect to protect the taxpayers, the people of the United States against graft, corruption, the good old boy network, and the like. Competition is good, and we need to take a look at our acquisition process so that it also is a subject of innovation.
So speaking of competition, do you think that acquisition competition should elevate company cybersecurity capabilities in that competition?
Well, I think competition's good in everything. It's American. And, frankly, if we don't have competition, if we're going sole source, then we get into the problem of you only go with what you know, and you may not know that there's something better out there. If you only look at one TV station, that's your worldview. You need to have a competition so you can actually go out there and find what's best. And, frankly, I think we need to be doing more fly-offs on capabilities, test drive and the like, and that should be part of our culture.
And Megan, you and I had a very interesting conversation talking about the gap between Silicon Valley and government. So when you work in that intersection between those two sectors, what are some of the common expectations or even misconceptions that these Silicon Valley types of companies have of working with the government?
So I think our previous panel did a really fantastic job on hitting on some of them, which is there is perception that the government's going to take a very long time. And truthfully, some of the biggest gaps occur just because of differences in process and culture. So let me give you an example. We kind of have a loving joke that don't be sales guy number 1 for federal, be sales guy number 3, because the first one will come in, get a little bit of traction, but never really close anything. The second one will pick up and get some POCs, and the third one will make it rain. Now, in between, your board, the VCs that gave you hundreds of millions of dollars are saying, what's the status? How's this deal coming with DHS? And you go, I don't know. I sent it over the fence. How about now? I'm still not sure. There's no visibility into it. So when you're driven by quarterly reports and things like that to your stakeholders, it's really hard to go after the government market with confidence because the lack of transparency between the processes. Now that said, kind of to the earlier point on the acquisition problem, it is a challenge how to navigate it. They don't know how to write those 50-page procurements or what the language needs to look like, and nor do they have bid and proposal teams like the prime contractors often had. So they're not dedicating people that only know this world out of the gate. But they do want to show you. The biggest thing that we hear on the commentary from all of our companies is, I just want to show them. If you could let me in the door and let me demonstrate my technology, I really want to understand their problem, then I truly believe that they're going to be interested and see the art of the possible. So if we can use, there are mechanisms in the FAR that we can use today to do more of those challenges and let them come in and demonstrate, let them show you, hack at it, see if their cybersecurity practices are sound around the tech. So, anyone in the room that's either involved in procurement or leading some of these things, I really just encourage you to kind of get outside the comfort zone and find ways so that tech can come in and actually show you the art of the possible.
Yeah, have industry days, for crying out loud. A lot of folks don't have industry days. And it's important to understand what's in the realm of the possible.
And as the federal CISO, you were charged with driving, or you were charged of cybersecurity policy implementation and driving that across government. So how much room for innovation did you have? And was there a point in time when you wished that you had more room to be more innovative?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, we have enough policies, so I didn't focus as much on that as I did implementation, and our execution is terrible. So that really was the focus of my efforts. As far as innovation goes, the shot clock ran out on me before I really could get into that as much as I wanted to. And part of the reason is we have some capabilities that we went and procured that were perfectly good to meet our needs, but we weren't implementing it well. And you'd mentioned the multi-factor authentication. We went out and we bought CAC cards for the military and PIV cards for the civilian agencies. I remember seeing the document when I was a colonel back in 2003 that says we're going to have this all done by 2005, and then 2008. And if you take a look at the FSMA report that my old office put out, now that we've got some tools that can actually measure the implementation, we're not even 50% in some key areas. I mean, this was supposed to be done a decade ago. Great technology that we just haven't been able to implement well. So I think as we take a look at innovation in the federal government from a cybersecurity standpoint, we also have to factor in, can we in fact implement it? It doesn't have to be just a good idea. It has to be a good idea that we can actually use and use quickly. And that's a problem. Yeah, that's a problem that we need to address together.
Yeah, but I think the interesting part is, well, kind of the ironic part is some of the technology that could, in fact, solve some of our issues is the same technology that can't get in the door.
Yep.
And so I spoke a little bit earlier about some of the big overarching challenges and why, emerging tech is really critical to government. But, we need to, I think status quo right now is our riskiest option. And when we talk about cyber, we spend so much time trying to vet and give ATOs around cyber technology tools to see if we can even use them. Meanwhile, the stuff that we have internally is not secure enough. So just kind of echoing what he says.
Yeah.
It's same with security clearances that you talked about earlier. Some of the same tech that can actually fix a lot of the backlog problem is the same tech that can't get in the door because of our acquisition processes.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked earlier today, one of the panels was talking about the timeline. Just internally for security clearance processing, frankly, you could have a child faster than you can get a security clearance.
I think I did that, actually.
Yeah.
I tested the theory, yes.
Well, and the thing about it is with the capabilities for big data and the fact that we do have all these data sets in the federal government, we certainly should be able to use technology to help buy down that time frame.
And a big part of the innovation conundrum is having skilled talent. And you are big on continuous training, especially when it comes to cyber, and having people who are either up to date with their skills or reskilling people, Greg. So talk a little bit about that, because I feel like agencies could use a little bit more guidance on how to take a more innovative approach to the cyber workforce.
Well, thanks for that. Frankly, I'm one of these guys who takes a look at our current state of cyber training and just shake my head and saying this is just not good enough. And perhaps you're in agreement with me that one and done training is not good enough. Right now, if you take a look at the vast majority of government employees, they get a quick rushed training just to get them onto the network upon the time that they join the organization. And they've got all sorts of other distractions, so they're not paying as much attention as they should be. And then that's followed up by extremely timely, and I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek, once a year annual refresher training that everybody looks forward to, right? You guys are looking forward to your annual refresher training. And frankly, that's just not good enough. And there's a lot of great ideas from the private sector on how to keep that cyber awareness and cyber strong workforce ready to go. Alex Stamos, a friend of mine who's at Facebook, he's got a colleague who introduced gamification into their workforce. So it's a continual process, and it's using methodologies that resonate extremely well with the workforce. I think leadership also needs to be trained as far as what their responsibilities are, including just walking around and quizzing folks. What's your high value asset? What information do you need to protect? How do you protect it? We have a technology focus. We're not thinking about protecting our information over the phone, protecting it in hard copy. We just default to the technology. It's more of a holistic approach, and I'm seeing that folks that are doing a people, process, and technology approach to cyber training and workforce development are the ones that are most successful.
And Megan, you said in our panel prep call, no one in Silicon Valley is Googling broad agency announcements. So how can federal agencies better communicate their needs to these types of businesses that are out there and want to work with government?
Sure. So it's an interesting question. It comes up all the time. So I'll give you an example. We have the privilege of working with technology that has consciously decided they want to work with the government market. And we still talk about all the different procurement vehicles, and we'll bring up CRADAs and BAAs, and they're taking notes. It's not that they don't want to look for it. They're very patriotic. They don't know that term. They don't know it actually exists. And if you try to Google, how do I work with the federal government? It's like filing your own tax return, good luck. So, I think sometimes when we're in the DC bubble, it's really easy to think that our problems are very transparent when they're actually not. So even to say, Homeland Security, we know what they do, sometimes that's actually not as transparent as you might think it is. So if you're going to put out solicitations, or if you're looking and doing market research broadly for emerging tech, you have to start thinking like they think, or get outside your box. How can you put stuff in TechCrunch or Wired and the publications that they're actually reading? How can you go out and...
GovernmentCIO Media.com.
There's this great publication, GovernmentCIO.
The best.
Yeah, or actually go out. I mean, obviously, a lot of the agencies are standing up offices out in the Valley and in Austin and Boston and Boulder and things like that, which is helpful. But you can engage with, circulate with the venture capitalists who will push those things out to their entire portfolio. Send it to us. We do this for all of our friends that are innovating inside government. Hey, I've got this amazing OTA call out. Great, I'll push it out to our entire network of VCs and tech firms. So just get a little bit outside your normal way of thinking. Put on your Silicon Valley tuxedo that I'm wearing right now. And
you said that the government agencies, people who work there, don't have to wear hoodies and jeans to speak the language, but there are certain things that they could...
No, I mean, if you want to wear a hoodie, it's very comfortable. But, you can, I would say as a very broad word of advice, if you have more than 5 acronyms in the first paragraph of your solicitation, you've completely lost most of the emerging tech, because they will assume it's Wired, and they won't actually understand what it is you're looking for. So, try to make your requirements and things that you're looking for. What outcome are you looking at? I want to go to the moon. I'm not looking for a rocket that has 3 boosters attached to it, because things that exist that could solve your problem you might not even be aware of, and you might unintentionally write your requirements in a way that's going to preclude a lot of people from bidding on it.
Well, sadly, we don't have time for any questions. I'm getting the side eye from my colleagues here. So thank you very much, Greg Toohill and Megan Metzger. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Camille.
And I'm going to reintroduce my colleague, Michael Hoffman, who will have a conversation with DIUX.
We'll start with DIUX and what it stands for: Defense Innovation Unit Experimental. Took me a little bit to learn it, but we're really excited to have DIUX represented here because in a lot of ways, DIUX is kind of, I wouldn't say a golden child in some ways, of this innovation movement, especially in the Defense Department piece. I'll just move over here. This is something that has gotten quite a bit of attention from the Defense Secretary and the like. So we're really excited to have DIUX partner Win Elder join us. Win has quite a career within the Air Force. He retired as an Air Force colonel. He served as the commander of the 62nd Airlift Wing. He's also spent time as the executive assistant to the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Win, today is the start of March Madness. Win also is a UVA grad and quite the basketball fan. So we're going to take the next 20 minutes to talk about UVA's chances of winning the Final Four. Just kidding. Actually, I could probably do 20 minutes on that as a Maryland fan, but it's different. So, no, we didn't. That's tough, actually. So Win, come on, if you don't mind, join us to do the stairs and the walk here. But we can just sit down here. So I'll just kick off, Win, and let you, we started with an introduction, but if you could take 5 minutes to talk a little bit about your role at DIUX, and maybe just start with how DIUX came to be.
Sure. When I was actually on active duty working for Admiral Winnefeld at the time, we were actually at National Science Foundation, and they showed him a chart where it showed the percentage of S&T R&D that was organically funded by the government and over time, and it went from 70% down to 10% today, or I don't remember the exact numbers. And he immediately said, we got to get out to the valley in a more meaningful way. And he and then Secretary Hagel at the time started talking and came up sort of with the idea. And then Secretary Carter certainly put a lot of effort into setting up a presence in initially Silicon Valley specifically to be the connective tissue for the Department of Defense for commercial technologies that were relevant on the battlefield today and tomorrow, that the innovation and R&D was in the commercial space was far outpacing what was being done in the department or could be done in the foreseeable future. And the stat that I use a lot that it just still blows me away is that just Amazon and Google outspend the entire federal government's R&D on autonomy 10-1. Just those two companies. Like we're not going to catch them, right? The consumer market is too big, too innovative, and they can pay too much. Like we're just not going to catch up. And so having a way to tap into those specific technologies in a way that was more accommodating or for especially non-traditional companies that weren't used to doing business with the government, how to do business on their terms. That's why the background of how it got set up.
Okay. So there's been a mention this morning a little bit about OTAs and other transaction authorities. DIUX has been really at the forefront of utilizing OTAs, but also they have a program called the Commercial Solutions Opening Program, which was put together, if I'm correct, by the Army Acquisition Command. Can you talk a little bit about that program and how you guys are using that to attract some commercial technology companies that might not be working in the government space?
Yeah, and I think that OTs have been around forever, and lots of agencies have used them to varying degrees of success. Army Contracting Command in New Jersey we ended up using as our contracting shop. They had the most expertise. And so it's not a new authority. The only real authority that's new for this is in the 2016 NDAA, Congress authorized the Department of Defense that if a competitively run prototype OT, it could go to straight to a production OT without further recompete. That's the only new authority that's out there. But that is instrumental in the incentive for a non-traditional small company to want to invest money into fielding a project and not then waiting 2 years through the FAR process. So it's still competitively sourced. It's just that out there they call it the Valley of Death, where they just sit around and wait and wait and wait. And so what the CSO, the Commercial Solutions Offering, did was sort of just package up the OT, prototype OT process in a way that was just a little easier for business. It's run sort of like FedBiz Ops in the sense that we post an offering online, anybody can respond to it. There's cuts, as they meet the various needs of the customer, and then the customer ends up picking one. But the CSO is really just how the OT authority is packaged for use.
Okay. After retiring from the Air Force, you took 2 years off, maybe from military service, working for a small fruit company. But now 2 years later, you've come back, working with Apple. What are some of the lessons that you were able to learn from going outside of the Defense Department and maybe now coming back and being able to apply them as a partner with the DIUX?
First off, I would say as big as Apple is worldwide, in the federal government, it's a relatively small player, and I saw the difficulties of trying to be a new entrant, so to speak, into a very established hierarchy of companies and how the system works and how difficult it is. And it just struck me like, if Apple has difficulty with a certain system, then a small company probably experiences 10 times, whatever, and so that was interesting to me because you're at Apple, but you're also small in this particular market. The other thing was how innovation is done in the commercial sector, especially in the Valley, compared to what I had seen called innovation in the government, and they're very different how they go about it, and there's reasons why. One's a return on investment model, one's a mission success model. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why innovation happens differently in the commercial sector. But what I have found is that, government agencies are different, but they're not as different as they think they are. When General Sullivan and I traveled out to Valley when he first got confirmed, we went out to all the VC firms, and we were out there talking about cybersecurity. And, he's the vice chairman of the Department of Defense. He's like, we've got we've got very particular needs. And what struck us is the VC firms all kind of laughed at him. They're like, you guys think you take data seriously, but you don't. We have customers that take data very seriously on Wall Street and some other places. And the point hit home for him and me that just like, wow, yes, we do have unique needs, but they're not quite as unique as we sometimes think we are. And so government agencies tend to talk themselves into that they're so special that they have to have everything custom built. And we could do that for decades, right? There are certain technologies that we can't do that anymore. And so helping a government agency understand that things that are commercially built and produced can be more secure than what they built themselves, can be cheaper, can be upgraded faster, and that loss of control doesn't lead to a loss of security. That's a huge cultural barrier for particular agencies. So that was something I learned a lot before I came back.
So DIUX has a relatively small budget when you consider, we're talking millions and millions of dollars, but relatively compared to the rest of the Defense Department, relatively small. But at the same time, DIUX leverages that budget and leverages relationships with different agencies within the Defense Department, and as well as venture capital firms or financial firms as well. Could you talk a little bit about how DIUX works
Sure.
that, even with such a small staff?
Yeah, it is. It's small, but it's as I'm finding, it's a disproportionately emotional set of money on the Hill.
That is true.
But,
we'll get into that soon.
It is. Anyway, I'll leave that there. So there's two types of projects. There is the customer-driven project. When I say customer from DIUX, it's a DoD agency of some sort. It could be a COCOM, could be a service, some agency within the service. They come to us with a problem, and we curate that. Is it the right kind of problem? Will it scale to a bigger problem? Is it meaningful? But we try to use their money And in some ways, it was designed that way, that you just didn't have this big pot of money sitting at DIUX that people could go tap into. If you had a problem that you were trying to solve and you just needed help finding a non-traditional company, perhaps, or the technology itself, and needed to do it very, very quickly, build and field quickly, then they could come to us as a navigator through this OT process and into the parts of the overall industry that they were less familiar with. And so that a lot of our projects are 100% customer funded. You know, many of our biggest successes, DIUX didn't spend any of our money. Now, so we have a little pot of RDT&E money that is, in essence, has been appropriated to us in our role as sort of a technology sentry out in the valley. Sometimes we will come across things that there is no demand signal from a service already established because they don't even know it exists in some ways, or a combination of technologies, as most innovation is it's already out there much farther along, and so we can use some RDT&E money to build sort of our own prototype and help build the demand signal at whatever particular service or agency makes the most sense. That gets the most scrutiny because, you know, in the commercial world, when you can fail, right? With government money, failure is frowned upon, right? And so, but that's why the pot of money is so small, is it's primarily customer funded.
So recently, DIUX got a bit of attention, at least especially in Northern Virginia, with a recent project called Reading Cloud. DIUX started working with Reading Cloud, and that it grew. I'll just let you kind of explain with that, because we were talking a little bit before that, and I don't want to explain the whole thing because I'm going to mess it up. But go ahead. If you want to talk about how it worked and maybe the miscommunication there.
So there was a competitive prototype OT that Transcom ran. A company was selected, won, and using the authorities from that NDA, it went to a production OT contract. There's a protest against that piece that's got to run its course, and that part, you know, I certainly am not going to talk about. But the part that I think is somewhat helpful in this is that there is so much misunderstanding, and this is new stuff, right? The competitive part of the process is during the prototype OT, and understanding the industry's understanding that if you miss that part, you might be left out of the production part. You sort of have to get engaged in the competition earlier than maybe some companies are used to, right? And so there's an education process just going on that it's still fair and open, right? The other part that was a little bit misconstrued was that the Department of Defense has a huge cloud initiative going on right now with the JEDI contract. This had nothing to do with that other than bad timing. Yeah, and so those two issues merged in a lot of people's minds, or people were connecting dots that certainly weren't connected from our perspective. And so, you know, the protest will run its course. You know, I was on the Hill a lot last week just explaining, you know, the difference between production OTs and prototype OTs and what the cloud one was designed to do. And so I think it's going to be beneficial in the long run that this happened, because a lot of learning happened by all sectors, us included, the last couple of weeks.
So you did mention that, you know, considering the size of the budget for DIUX, it does get quite a bit of attention from the Hill. You mentioned the fact that you were on the Hill. Why do you think that is? Why do you think, you know, maybe some of the larger players see it as a threat and don't realize it's actually an opportunity that the traditional defense industrial base can actually work through? Are there any misunderstandings?
Yeah, I think I certainly, from my perspective, some of the concern about DIUX and the money is just a lack of understanding of what it's for, and yeah, anytime you kind of upset a certain ecosystem, there's going to be, as it flushes out, people who may think they are going to lose out will push back. That's normal. But one of the things I hope that people learn through this is that, you know, traditional defense companies can work through OTs. There are two official ways. One is a cost sharing, where 1/3 of is paid for by the traditional defense company, and the other one is they can partner either with a non-traditional company or a small business. And we've run 3 successful projects where traditional companies have done. So Raytheon has done one. It was a counter UAS program where there were 5 different prototype OTs. 4 of them were by non-traditional, and then there was a sort of an integrator to take, and counter UAS is a very, very difficult problem, and it ends up being, right now, the solution tends to be some sort of layered defense, and a lot of the companies we are working with are developing some amazing new technologies in one part of that, but trying to integrate those is not their specialty, right? And so that's a perfect role for, quote, a traditional defense company to come in and, through an OT, be part of that and be complementary with what their skill set can be.
Well, we talked about this a little bit earlier during the national security panel, but could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that DIUX has initiated, such as the one that you guys are working with NGA on right now, and how that might go forward?
Sure. Probably the biggest demand signal that we get from our customers right now is either what's artificial intelligence, and autonomy. Those are the 2 big demand signals. And in the AI world, the 3 big use cases, and I think some of the previous speakers mentioned them. One is imagery analysis, especially overhead. It's a very complicated problem set for computers to handle, and I think we still only process 10 to 15% of all the imagery that we take, and it's going to get worse as the sensors multiply. So there's just a huge demand signal for help with how to process, evaluate, disseminate, and make use of intelligence in imagery form. Second is strategic analysis, wargaming. For those of you who are familiar with AlphaGo and how that, like the 5th column, that's what people want to, where is that insight that humans have been unable to decipher over 2,000 years of warfare? Can you bring AI into a wargaming scenario to develop strategies, con-ops, approaches that we just haven't thought of before that would give us an advantage? And then the other part of AI that is a big demand signal is predictive analytics of sorts. Right now, it's primarily in the supply chain maintenance. Big money to be saved there, as I think some of the other speakers mentioned. So in the imagery, we've set up XView Challenge, which is a challenge. We have the largest database publicly available, thanks to NGA, that's been labeled. I think it's like 60 different subsets of objects, and there's a challenge to, can we take that to require less resolution? Can we get more object classes? And so there's a couple of different outcomes of what we're looking for. But as AI and ML comes down to how big your database is, right, in addition to the talent of the people working on it. But first and foremost, you need large data sets. So by partnering with NGA, we were able to put together a database large enough that we think some pretty unique insights will come out of this challenge.
Well, we have about 2 more minutes, so I wanted to open it up for questions if anybody has. I know we have a large U.S. Air Force contingent, so I don't know if they had a couple questions here. Matt has the microphone, so if you could just raise your hand, we can pick it up. Anyway, right here in the front.
Hey, Justin Doubleday, reporter with Inside Defense. The last panel also touched on OTAs and talked about how the FAR had good intentions to set up, to get against fraud, waste, and abuse. And it seems like OTAs are kind of seen like the Wild West right now. There are no rules. So I'm wondering, is there a framework that you can put in place for OTAs so that there's transparency, there's accountability, without it turning into another FAR where it's too constrained?
Fair enough. I'm not sure I agree with the first part of your question there, that it's the Wild West. I mean, there are very strict rules on, like I said, OTs have been around in U.S. code forever. It's a different approach, and I think the best advice I got when I was trying to get my head around them was, don't try to look for an equivalency in the FAR. Like, well, what's the FAR equivalent of this in CSO? It's a different process completely. And so some of those controls and mechanisms in the FAR, it's not there in the OT process. That doesn't mean it's less transparent or sloppy in any way. So the biggest one is that FARs are requirement-based at their core, right? You have to tell industry, here's exactly what we want in every kind of key performance, whatever. You know, I mean, you just go down the line and you either meet it or you don't. And that drives out the risk in some ways. It also puts me in a cockpit many times in my life where the software is 15 years out of date when the day it rolls off the production line, right? The OT process is based on an outcome. Here's our desired outcome. How do you provide a solution to that? And as the customer, I can accept risk now. I can say, that's close enough at that price, I'll accept the risk, right? And so it's transparent in the communication between the customer's desired outcome and what the company solution, what they're providing, right? Is there additional oversight? I think that as these become more prevalent and there's more discussion, I hope it just improves, but not in a way that kills fundamentally that ability for customers and vendors to work directly, more quickly, and for the customer to say, hey, I'll take the 92% solution and go to war today, rather than build it. So, and I think both are very useful. I mean, I don't think the OTs put the FAR away. I think it's just another arrow in your quiver when you're a customer trying to figure out a solution. I think it's just a good additional option.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. Anybody? Nope. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Wynn. I really appreciate the time. And I'm going to introduce Steve back up onto the stage. And he's going to close us out with the industry perspective. While he's coming up, I just want to encourage again, folks, to get involved on Twitter, Facebook, what have you, on Uncle Sam Innovates. You can see, as you can see coming up around, people are getting involved here. And I'll make one more plug for our networking reception today. I see there's quite a few people trying to talk to our speakers here in the back or on the side. Quite a few of them will be at our networking reception, so that's a great opportunity to have these type of conversations. That's why we developed the structured networking reception the way we did, to really give you that opportunity to have this dialogue and these conversations. So without further ado, Steve.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Great job. This is the last panel. We stand in between you and lunch, so let me introduce the three gentlemen. You've met already Anthony Robbins from Nvidia. I know I'm not going to get...
You're so awesome.
You've met Nick Saki from Pure. You have not met Dave Ext from Red Hat. And between all three of them, they have a wealth of knowledge and experience selling into the government. And so we're just going to take a few minutes. It's not going to be a long panel, but we're going to take a few minutes to get their perspective on what government can do to help improve the process, to help bring innovation in. And I'm going to start with you, Dave, since you have not had any stage time yet. Give us your perspective on what are those 2 or 3 things you think government can do. And also, I'll ask all of you as you're chatting, is there 1 or 2 areas within government that you think you're particularly proud of, that Red Hat, in your case, was able to get innovation in government? So go first.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. So I was just to start, though, with Uncle Sam meets Silicon Valley, I wasn't sure if I should wear my necktie or my skinny jeans, so I went with the necktie.
Yeah,
so you're welcome.
Yeah. So you and I should have not worn ties because the other 2 gentlemen clearly don't. But
that's all right.
I like the socks too, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think that the really interesting thing, I was thinking that this session today, everybody would be talking about technology, right? Tech is on the backdrop here. But one of the big themes that I've seen throughout the day is that, when you think about digital transformation, it's people, it's process, and it's technology. And where a lot of times I think if the government focuses solely on technology and goes to Silicon Valley looking for that hot widget, and then they bring it back to their agency, and then they put it in their waterfall model, and they don't have their people trained up, you're going to have the history repeat itself over and over again. So I was really excited to see everybody talking about people and process. So the process part is your, that's things like embracing agile, DevOps, open source, but it's also training people as well. It's the people part. How do you make them aware of how to take advantage of these processes, not just the technologies, but the processes, and also not just the people that you have, but also attracting and retaining the talent that you're trying, and attracting the talent from the schools that you're trying to get. So I know my daughter is watching on the live stream right now. Hi, Lauren. She's a computer science student at, yeah. So she is a computer science student at RIT, and everything that she is doing is in open source. All the languages that she's learning, she's doing a development on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And so, that's what the kids are coming out of school with. So for the government agencies to adopt that, they should be looking at, open source technologies.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, as I did with Anthony earlier. Can you, to the extent you can, talk about it, can you cite an experience where Red Hat has brought some innovation into government?
Yeah, so one of the more exciting things, I'll talk about a community project that we worked on. And I know, like earlier during the intelligence community session, we talked a lot, and DoD, we talked a lot about CRADAs and all that. And to me, it's like, I think that CRADAs are a good idea, but you can even accelerate faster if you get people working on open source projects, because you don't get the lawyers involved as much. Right? And so one example that we have that, you talk to me, and I'm always telling people about the SCAP security guide, which is technology that helps people accelerate getting systems into production faster in the government. And so we've worked with DISA, NIST, NSA, all these agencies, also private industry as well, government contractors, to develop security lockdown procedures. So, and I was looking at the stats last night. So from going from RHEL 5 to 6, we cut the time in half by doing it as part of an open source community. And then going from RHEL 6 to 7, that content came out in 25% of the time of the original time before. So it really accelerates that. And by automating your security profile, that frees up that time that you have for focusing on the mission, focusing on innovation, and looking at emerging technologies.
Fantastic. Nick, how about you? What are those 2 or 3 things government should be doing? You were in government, now you're selling to government. What are some of the 2 or 3 things that government should be doing that would improve innovation?
Take risks. So one of the startup mantras, or the mantra of Silicon Valley, is fail early, fail fast. When we're talking about investments in new and emerging technologies, one of the things that I'm gratified to see in the last 4 years is that, number one, we're moving agencies to where the talent is. It is, I actually did a little method acting today, so not only am I dressing the part, but I actually flew in from Los Angeles on the red eye. So now I know what it's like to be a Silicon Valley entrepreneur coming to Washington, and understand sort of from their perspective what this actually looks like. So DIUX being established at Moffett Field, literally 3 miles down Castro Street from Pure Storage headquarters, is a great step in the right direction. But does it hurt us to have an innovation office out there? InQtel certainly does. Yeah. If you want to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in emerging technologies, do that. Office space is expensive, but missing innovations is actually really expensive. Interestingly, in 2007, I was working on a workstation in Iraq that was powered by Red Hat Enterprise Linux version 5, and you guys had crossed the $1 billion revenue threshold, which we just did this year.
Awesome. Wow.
Yeah, so startups become big companies, but it's innovation happens in other places besides DC.
Yeah.
So go where the innovation is. Grab a couple of people who are wild free thinkers and send them out there. and let them go find things for you. Have a discovery and innovation cell. Now, that's another thing I saw today that I'm really encouraged about. NGA's got theirs, USAID's got theirs. We're actually, this group is full of people who've been designated by their departments to go discover the new, foster that.
Right.
My third one is shadow IT. Now, Steve, I said this, I guess, last year as well.
Right.
Your shadow IT cells are not rogue. They're your innovation centers. They're trying to solve problems, and they're doing it in unconventional ways and often with off-the-books money. But they're trying to solve some real problems. So find them and foster them, shine some light on them, give them a little bit of direction, but let them run around and figure it out. And then you can actually go to market or go back to industry, to us, and say, I want a solution that looks like this.
Right. Right.
I guess the last thing I want to emphasize is stop trying to buy boxes and start buying standards. The IT world that we're working in, whether it's cloud or it's on-premises infrastructure, is driven entirely by APIs and open standards. So specify how you want us to connect to your enterprise. Don't tell us what you necessarily want us to build. Give us broader parameters so that we can sort of snap in architecture. The corollary I draw is when you buy a car, you don't want to have to rebuild your garage. So just tell us how big the garage is and we'll park in it.
Good point.
All right, thanks.
Very good. Anthony, how about you? You've been selling into public sector for a while, and I'm sure you have your opinions on it. And you now represent, as we said earlier, a high-flying company out from Silicon Valley. What are some of your observations about selling into public sector?
A couple things. Can I take a contrarian position? Yeah. Can I? So here's the deal. From my perspective, I've been doing this for 30 years. There's a massive amount of innovation happening inside the federal government, a massive amount of it, for which that we should all have immense pride in as taxpayers and citizens of this country. That's number one. Number two, it's the hardest business in the world. Like there's more complexity in the business of government than in any other segment of the world. But that doesn't mean it can't be figured out. The third thing, right, so the innovation's happening, it's hard. Third thing is we need to stop whining. How about that? How about start, because here's the thing, the world has changed. So you would be surprised at how much technology is being deployed in the, we would be surprised, we might be proud of how much technology is actually being deployed, small companies and startups is being deployed within the federal government. So I think we need to stop whining because here's the deal. If you go into, you can't just go knock on the front door of Ford and bring them advanced technology solutions. Hey, I'd like to see your CEO, and I'd like to go call on the head of R&D, and I'd like to sell you some stuff. Here's everyone's spec sheet says this. Well, my stuff is better, and it's faster, and it's cheaper. I could write the spec sheet for everyone. The magic is not in what you do. The magic is in what you do and how it solves the problems that our customers have. And so if you can figure out what is it that you have, how does it work to solve mission problems for the customers that you want to go sell to, you can probably find a way to get it done. And whether that's, and I think Greg and others, if it's in the DIUX guys mentioned, so if it's by teaming with systems integrators who have contracts or whatever it is, there's usually a way to get it done. But I think there's a lot of innovation going on. The business of government is hard. We need to stop whining. I think we'll find ourselves, pleasantly, surprised with the amount of stuff that's actually happening in this marketplace.
Oh, that's terrific. All right, I'm going to start down with you, Nick. Sort of give us a call to action. How, if somebody wants to learn more about Pure Storage and get involved in programs that you're on, different contracts, how do they do it?
Obviously, everybody always says the same thing, www.purestorage.com. And then, of course, there's all the usual social media outlets and so forth. You can find me. I'm pretty easy. PSAKI is a pretty uncommon name. But I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, and I love doing exactly what Anthony's talking about, which is finding out what are your challenges, what are the big problems you're trying to overcome. The other thing that we know about information technology and problem solving and really the intelligence we're trying to derive from our data is there are almost no unique problems. Everybody's experienced, somebody somewhere has experienced a similar challenge to what you're doing. The IRS has a huge problem processing tax returns, and yet somehow Intuit manages to file 183 million of them every year on time, securely. It's a good group of guys to talk to. So come talk to us. Somebody out there has helped another commercial entity or another government customer overcome the same kind of challenge and learned a few things along the way to help smooth that process. So please feel free to reach out to us.
Great. Dave, your turn.
Okay, so when you look at people that are embracing open source, and you look at your technology stack of how you're going to be implementing technology, focus on think about the boring stuff, the stuff that let a vendor do that for you. Okay, so for instance, if it's the operating system or the container platform, and one of the things that we're famous for is that we make the technology boring, right? Where it just works, right? Where that frees you up to innovate. But it's more than just using the open source software. It's being a contributor to the open source projects themselves. So if you think about the previous speakers from the intelligence community talking about like so many common problems that are being faced with geospatial intelligence data having common applications in the commercial world. Open sourcing a lot of that technology that isn't necessarily mission specific allows you to get contributions from people all over the world, including private industry. So that makes your projects a lot more valuable and a lot more useful, and you can deliver to your stakeholders a lot faster.
Terrific. Nick, you said you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I did. Collaboration is huge, and the opportunities to come together at this type of a forum, GovernmentCIO, and to meet your colleagues who also have similar types of challenges is a great way to learn what else they're doing. So it shortens the innovation cycle and the problem-solving cycle in your own organization. Keep coming to these kind of meeting events and talk to your peers and other agencies. It is incredibly valuable. As we do this, this happens in commercial industry all the time. And Silicon Valley has to be the chattiest, most collaborative environment I've ever seen in my life, and it works. So, do come to these things. It is a great opportunity to learn from your counterparts.
Great. Anthony, how about you?
So 3 things. So innovation, it's not possible for the government to innovate at the rate at which we are all spending money. So if you look at like AT&T and Verizon, they're spending more money in R&D on an annual basis inside the U.S., where the DoD, for example, cannot innovate on their networks fast enough. So we have to figure out how to bring innovation and partnership to the government like never before. The same could be said in cloud, and the same could be said in a number of areas. But don't miss the fact that science and technology spending is still a lot of money, right? So that we got to figure out how to bring innovation. The next thing is training, and Greg mentioned training. So there's, I don't know, pick your favorite number. There's rumored to be a million architects and developers that are across the federal government, including the systems integrators. So there's a base that we are responsible for training, because there's no way that the government's going to outsource all their mission critical systems. They'll go to the cloud when they can, but they won't go all the time. So if any of us think of, hey, just give it to commercial industries, that's an IQ test that you just failed, right? So because the idea is government's going to have a highly trained and skilled workforce that can manage these systems in support of whether it's warfighters or citizen services. So innovation and training. I mean, in the case of training in cyber, we won't fill the cyber jobs that are currently open in our lifetime. So there's more jobs that we're not going to get there. So we have to do some things differently. The final thing I'll say is probably the need for partnership has never been better. And the federal government doesn't want to be sold to. One of the oldest professions in the world is selling, sales, and one of the most despised profession in the world is sales, right? And so, but everybody wants to be served. And so what I always challenge my teams with is figure out the customer's mission requirements. And I'll illustrate it with a quick story, 30 seconds or less. Don't get nervous, Steve. So this summer I happened to land aboard the USS Macon Island, an amphibious assault ship, and it was amazing. So I landed aboard, at sea, and I got to tour, and I got to look in the eyeballs of many of 4,000 members of the crew that help protect this great nation that we all live in. And they're 18 to 22-year-olds. It's amazing. And I had lunch with them. I met with them. I toured the ship. It was amazing. And I got a chance to see the technology on a world-class amphibious assault ship that's part of our one of the most amazing navies that the world has ever known. And the technology that was aboard was like end of life before these kids were born. Right? It's a big deal. So now the complexity of upgrading technology aboard something like that, or within Navy programs across the DoD, it's very difficult work. But it's not that difficult compared to selling to Ford, and other large global enterprises. So I was kind of say, get very focused on the innovation opportunities that we have, figure out how to partner. We have to train the government workforce, and then we have to figure out how to serve this marketplace. And you don't serve them by whining about what can't be done. You serve them by figuring out what can be done and how to serve this great nation's warfighters and citizens.
Fantastic. Great. Well, again, because of the three companies that these gentlemen represent, we were able to put this event on today. So please join me in thanking them very much. And tonight, we reconvene at 5 o'clock for a very different kind of networking. It's structured networking, and we really invite you to come back and enjoy the evening from 5 to 8 o'clock. Lunch is served. Please plan to stay and have lunch and mingle. Thank you very much for being here.